How you doing today, sir?
Not bad.
Beautiful. Glad you could make
It's
it.
Friday
Awesome.
night, TGIF.
Right? you know, it's actually kind of funny, Snake. Like, you have this demeanor where it's so like unassuming and calm, and you'll leave some stuff in chat where I don't even picture you saying it. Like that chat you left that one time in stream. I'm kidding. I'm not even kidding, dude. I had to mute my mic because it killed me. You put
Oh,
something in chat that killed me,
it
and you had
was
put. Do you remember what it was?
it was the George Floyd. I'm about to end this
Yes.
man's whole career.
Murdered me.
Oh man.
Murdered me. I was not able to even operate in my stream because I had to get myself under control with that one.
I
Yes.
I like the spicy memes.
You know what,
I made
man?
that and I was about to
Oh.
post it on Twitter and I was like, maybe this is not a great idea.
Not if you want to keep your Twitter account,
Yeah.
probably. Oh my gosh! Well, this is going to be fun, man. This is going to
Yeah.
be a blast. I'm excited. So, I'm just kind of treating this like an interview thing. I kind of want to let you kind of like really kind of tell your story, and I'm just going to kind of really just elaborate or throw things in here and there to kind of, keep the conversation going or fill us in. But really, just kind of treat this like your show. Because I want to explore this. I want to explore your whole path, your life story, your justification, because you did take kind of like a secular path to basically get to the conservative side, right? I mean, essentially.
Well, I mean, sort of. The left would call me conservative. Uh,
Right.
and I'm more of a centrist, but actually, I mean, I guess I am kind of. I feel like I lean a little bit left, but when I take the political compass test, it says I'm
Right.
slightly right. So I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Well,
I'm
it's
kind
it's
of
funny.
centrist.
They kind of, there was some of these studies about people's self-reported biases, and we're not always the best judge of
Yeah.
ourselves and our beliefs and how biased we are and where we lean, because some of it is wishful thinking. Some of it we wish it was something that just us and our personhood delves into something else. So okay, well, this is great, man. Hey, you know what, I'm excited, and feel free to just be yourself, enjoy it. I mean, have fun with it. Just feel free to pitch your perspective, worldview, why you see it the way you do. I thought your debate with SJ was awesome.
Oh, really?
And I think both of you actually did really good pitching your perspectives. And I still want to set up that thing where we're going to talk more about your subjective moral framework, because that is very interesting
Yeah,
to me.
and I
We
think
will do that.
I think it's improved a lot actually just since that, because I've had a
Beautiful.
lot of people who kind of agree with my conclusions, but they were critiquing me, and I was like, I want this. I need this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that
Yeah.
shows that you really are interested in the integrity of the actual thing itself instead of just trying to be right. So that's awesome, man. That's really good. I mean, super kudos for that.
I try.
This is going to be really educational for me, because now I'm going to get to see how someone else kind of did it. Because here's the thing, like, to me, it almost seems like, according to your worldview, like the leftism almost seems to be attached, or at least they would like to believe that. Like this is some, like, leftism is somehow like a moral structured good or something. And you've like been like, nope, that doesn't make sense to me, and I'm just so excited to explore that.
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, man, I'm stoked. I'm stoked. I'm really happy you came here and did this, and I'm actually even really happy that we got on good terms, and that we're able to have some awesome conversations. I'm telling you, Snake, we can have some fun stuff to explore here in the future. So I'm excited you found me.
For sure.
Beautiful. Okay, my friend. Well, let me put you in the back, get everything set up and ready to go, and I'll bring you in when we're ready for our introduction.
Sweet.
Okay. Okay. I think everything's pretty much ready to go. Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Oh, why do I feel like I'm lagging so much? My goodness. Just one of those days. The heat, guys, I'm telling you, gets to you. I got a special treat for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We are joined by none other then Snake was right. And he is here to have a neat little conversation with us about his deconversion from the left, his leaving of the left, his alignment of attempting to push towards better truths, more cognizant goals of understanding reality in a practical way as opposed to in an emotional way. And so this is going to be a really interesting conversation, a little bit different than what we are typically used to, guys. We're branching off of our kind of standard theological, philosophical, cultural, historical, and we're kind of just delving into this full-blown, situation of politics here tonight because, well, nice to get a little change. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, bring on our guest this evening. Snake was right. Sir, hello and welcome to Smokey Saint Stream.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Beautiful, beautiful. It is a pleasure to have you, sir. And Snake, we had a little bit of a rocky start between the two of us and a couple of comments. But we had another guy in here who I think has interacted with you a couple times and is in my comments and kind of set us together on the right track. And we actually have a few things in common. We actually have quite a few things in common, even some senses of humor.
Indeed.
You've managed to just pretty much destroy me in my own room with some of your chat comments making me laugh. So, sir, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, pitch any of your social media, and let anyone know about some of your projects you're working on.
Yeah, I run a channel called Snake Was Right, and basically, I mean, I guess it's kind of designed to be a little incendiary, but the basic meaning behind it is basically like the knowledge of good and evil is a good thing, and I see the Genesis story as kind of a metaphor for the overwhelming nature of the universe, kind of like God, and it will judge you mercilessly, and the snake is kind of saying take the fruit, and knowledge will be painful. You'll be aware of things. You'll be less happy almost, that because ignorance is bliss almost. But ultimately you're better off knowing the true nature of things. So
yeah, no, that's very interesting. Have you heard, by the way, my interpretation of that from, apparently I was told by Theodore that this is something that the patristic fathers shared in their interpretations of that story. But apparently, and I didn't know that I shared their opinion, this is just something that naturally came to me, which was the idea that the fruit on the tree was actually a kind of basically our first failure at delayed gratification. Almost as if to say, like, the reason that the tree was there was not because we were never supposed to eat it, but we were only supposed to eat of it when we were ready, when we actually had taken in the full scope of the knowledge of good. So that taking in the full scope of the knowledge of evil wouldn't have completely destroyed us the way it did. But anyway, that was my take on it. I think your take on it is very interesting, and we should have a conversation on some of our interpretations of that story sometime, because we could definitely delve into that. But that's a great introduction, sir, and thank you for that. And by the way, everyone, I did put Snake's channel link, in the description. So you guys want to go over there and show him some love, look at some of his content, go see what this young man has to say, because he's certainly got a bit of a sharp mind, and he's analyzing some things in some interesting ways, which are worth unpacking. Well, Snake, tonight, my goodness, we are talking about kind of this political divergence that we have in our culture and our society. And it seems like there is almost let's see how I put this, an emotional angst, if you will, this emotional drive to push us towards judging morality, judging everything based upon this kind of protection of our personal feelings. Could you walk me through a little bit about your previous political leanings before you kind of came to what you are today?
Well, yeah, and I just want to also point out, I've always been someone who really didn't give a crap like what you felt. It's I mean, I didn't want to be a dick or anything, but it's like feelings it may have been detrimental to some of my development, but I was very like, oh, feelings are stupid and they lead you down the wrong path, and you know, may be a little bit robotic, but I very much value truth over feelings. So whether that's inborn in me or it was installed by my parents or whatever, I don't know. That's kind of my central compass, and but
wherever it's come from, wherever it's manifested, it's put you a little bit ahead of the pack in terms of being able to separate you see, like, your decision making of how to interpret your reality is not emotionally driven, it's more logically driven. So I don't know how that could be bad.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Well, that's even kind of what you're saying here is like, well, I don't even care about the emotional side of the debate. Let's talk about what's practical, right? Let's talk about what's good. Let's talk about what's right. And that's one of the more reassuring things. Like the fact that a atheist even would stop and think and say, you know what? It's probably important we do kind of drive towards an objective moral framework as opposed to just doing what feels right. You know, you're not even really speaking the same language of your peer group. You know what I mean? You look kind of young. You don't look very old. So, I mean, I'm kind of picturing that Zoomer millennial type crowd that this probably doesn't make sense to them the way that you think.
Yeah, well, and that's my main beef with my own crowd, the atheist crowd, is subjective morality for sure, and a lot of what seems to be kind of coddling people and coddling their emotions. And like I said, the truth can hurt. It's often uncomfortable. So, I mean, to go over kind of where I came from, I guess liberal most of my life. My parents, they voted for George Bush and then Obama, and I voted for Obama. And I kind of naturally just came to be like a communist, I guess. I kind of had those ideals in me before I even knew what it was. I was like, oh, we have enough resources, we should give it to the poor and stuff like that. And so I kind of, in my teen years, early college years, I was pretty much an anti-capitalist. And I was looking back on my Facebook one day, and I was looking through, and I had said some things like build the mosque. Do you remember that whole movement?
Do you remember that one?
So very embarrassing at this point. But
but I'll tell you what, even if you believe different than what you did, your overall assertiveness to put it out there with a sense of, that you're doing what's right. There's something commendable to it.
Yeah, and ironically, it was kind of Islam that really was one of the things that kind of was the turning point for me.
Oh, tell me a little more about that. Now you got to unpack that a little more for me. Tell me how Islam was kind of a driving catalyst here for you.
Islam, and I've always been dedicated to the truth over feelings and humor. So I've always been very against censorship and things like that. So beautiful. Just absolutely. But as far as Islam goes, one day I just went out and I already had a Bible, and I had studied it in high school because I went to a Catholic high school. So I've read the whole Bible, but I went out and got actually a couple of Qurans and a Satanist Bible. What's that called? Yeah, I have it around here somewhere.
I used to have one myself years ago when I was in Bible college. I haven't seen it in a decade.
Yeah. And so I started reading the Quran, and I was like, this is awful, because I was kind of an Islam apologist for I don't know, I think I just unquestionably took the propaganda that was like, oh, Muslims are the victims of like Muslim terrorism is Muslim bigotry against Muslims. And I mean, to some degree that's true. Like, we shouldn't treat people unfairly, especially if they're, active
We should be
members,
willing to
peaceful
treat,
members of society.
yeah, we should be willing to treat individuals as individuals. And
Mm.
here's the issue which I kind of commend everyone to remember, not even just like about the Muslims, but in terms of engaging with them as well, is that they're kind of not really like the Muslims today, like certainly the Western Muslims, they're not really quote unquote real Muslims, in my opinion. Like, they don't, they basically just kind of follow the flowery, peaceful, Medina when Muhammad was kind of, the minority and he had to follow the rules. Like these are the verses they tend to want to, fixate on as being, the good standard of which to live the Muslim life. But it kind of ignores the whole other half of the story, the Meccan half of the story, where he was, basically a bloodthirsty warlord. And whenever he had majority control, he operated and kind of was opportunistic with it. So, I
Mm.
mean, in some ways, do you not recognize a few of the tactics of the left kind of
Oh,
in play there?
I was about to say, in many ways, it mirrors the victimhood narrative, where it starts
Mm,
off, I'm the victim, and I'm the meek and the poor, and I'm taking it on the cheek, and I'm the mature one, and then as soon as he gets power, he just oppresses everyone.
mm, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. And so, you know
Have
what? Yeah, go ahead, please.
have you heard of Dr. Bill Warner?
I have. I
Yeah.
love Doctor. It's
Oh
what is
yeah.
it? Political Islam, I think
Yeah.
is the name of his
The
channel. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
guys, if you have not found Political Islam, the Utah YouTube channel with Bill Warner, go get it. At the very least, go watch his video answering the stupid nonsense that they always throw at us about the Crusades. Okay, realize what the
Yeah.
Crusades were actually an answer to, and you'll never let a Muslim get away with that with you ever again.
His battle map was like
Oh, beautiful.
amazing. Just
Piece
some of
of
the
piece of
best
artwork.
historical
Yeah.
work I've ever seen.
Yeah, piece of artwork,
Yeah.
pure artwork. It was absolutely incredible. No, his work has been insane. The great thing about him is when he went to go, and he's read amazingly. He has read all of the Sahih Bukhari hadiths, every single one of them, and he went through it with the mindset of only looking what was useful to him, which is the political portion of Islam. He's not interested in it as a religious critique. He's interested in it as a political critique. He doesn't even see it as a religion. He sees it as a political movement. Would
Mm.
you agree with that, Snake?
Yeah. It's a Center for Political Islam, I think. And
Beautiful.
yeah, and like he says a lot, there is the dual sides of it. There's the peaceful side and the political oppressive side, and it's both. You can't really take out one or the other. But the thing about that is, it's like the one bad apple. What is the saying? One bad apple makes
One
the
bad
whole
apple ruined the
batch.
whole
Yeah,
bunch. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Well, and the idea is you have one bruised apple in there, it's going to spread, and each apple's going to
yeah.
get something messed up with. Yeah, and
Well,
that's true. And that's
it's like
even
if
how
someone,
Christians look at it with a little leaven leavens the whole lump. With the yeast. You know what I
yeah,
mean? That type of
it's like if someone hugs you and then stabs you. It's like, okay, well,
thing.
one clearly dominates the conversation. So
Clearly, yeah. I've used a similar analogy to some of the people on the left. They do seem the type to tell you they love you while they are in the process of stabbing you.
mhm.
It seems to be because, and again, it's that idea of I guess the push is that if you are ultimately protecting people's feelings, that's good enough. you know,
Yeah,
like it seems to be just this weird moral structure of the left. And the sad thing to me is they don't seem to, maybe you can correct me on this, Snake, if you see it differently, but they don't seem to have any solid justifications for anything except feelings. I mean, am I lost here? Like, because it doesn't seem like there's ever any data. There's never any information. There's never any solid critical thinking behind it. It's just I feel victimized. I feel oppressed. I feel whites are too privileged. I feel blacks are too underprivileged. I feel this. I feel that. And all of a sudden, we're basing everything, policies and everything included, upon feelings, as opposed to, is this actually for the greater good?
Yeah, I mean there are no real principles, at least not consistent ones. It's more of just like a protective, almost maternalistic type of, I guess, ideology. But an ideology even has principles, but they're just, I guess their principle is they kind of see everything through one lens of like white colonialism,
Mm.
or victim versus oppressor, and
Mm.
that's it. That's all they think about.
And the interesting thing about that too is the inability to probably recognize, like, at the best time, like, what even an oppressor actually is. And I
Hmm.
mean, I've heard some people go out on some real big reaches to try to score that victim card. And I guess maybe part of my issue is maybe some of that mentality that this society of your, I guess maybe your greatest value has to do if you're the biggest victim. Everyone's kind of competing. Every social group and every individual is almost kind of competing for who has the greatest victim status, and that somehow now becomes some type of social currency.
Yeah, the oppression Olympics, where,
Thank you.
yeah, if you get, I don't remember who came up with that, but uh, yeah, you basically have more points the more you can say, oh, this, I've been oppressed, and people feel bad for you, so
Right.
they want to do things in your favor and knock out your enemies and do stuff for you. So I mean, it has a tremendous amount of power, and some of it's not unjustified. We should stand up for victims,
Absolutely.
but it's
Absolutely.
exploited in the most insidious possible way,
Well,
I
and
think.
yeah, and I feel like if we're going to have this idea where, like, you're going to be so keen on sticking up for victims, we probably need to have a very good idea of what victims actually are.
Hmm.
Like, just because, see, like, for example, like, someone with a thicker skin will just be victimized by less things. The minor things won't mean anything to them. So if you're kind of in this mindset where, like, you're constantly, like you put it, like the victim Olympics, you're basically trying to constantly get one up on the victim cards. Um, I mean, aren't you basically just kind of almost looking for things to be offended by? And when I
Hmm.
say that, I mean, like, almost as if you almost feel morally compelled to get offended on the behalf of other people, even though you might not know if they're actually offended.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of minorities kind of on the centrist or conservative side will often say the only people I ever hear this coming from is white people, and white people sticking up for me as if I actually believe this, but I don't. And I think part of it is joining the mob before the mob turns on you, so that you're
Right.
kind of protected and safe in the mob. And uh, well, the other thing too is it's an addiction. It is a physical addiction. It's a state of mind, and
Mm.
people get addicted to this pattern of thought. And when you don't have that that feeling that you're used to, you seek it out, no matter what it is.
Mm.
It's like even like abuse victims, they will seek out another partner who's likely to abuse them because it's what they're used to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I agree with you on that. I mean, and I mean, how dangerous can it be to judge people's value upon, how much suffering they've supposedly had? Like, as if someone's suffering is supposed to somehow make them, masters of policy planning or
Well,
something
yeah,
like that. I mean,
and
I don't get that.
and a lot of the worst people who've ever lived have suffered a lot, and that's why they're so bad. Like all these school shooters, they have, I'll fully admit, they have been beaten down and suffer and have horrible lives, and that's why they turn to violence and
Right.
resentment. And
Right.
I mean, look at Hitler.
Yeah.
He had a pretty horrible life. I mean, he was lucky enough to survive World War One.
Right.
I think at some point he even went blind from just the trauma,
Yeah, well,
and
he had
he was
lots of PTSD
yeah.
and stuff related things too, because he was basically a gopher. He was he was the delivery, the guy that took the messages to the front lines and back and forth. That was his deal.
So he saw everything.
He saw everything. Yeah, and he was
Yeah.
in World War One. That was his big thing. And his particular, this is kind of the interesting thing about it, especially when you look at it from kind of a temporal reality type perspective. By all likelihood, based upon the position that Hitler even had in World War One, he shouldn't have survived. Majority of those men that did that particular job did not survive. It's a
Hmm.
very unlikely thing that Hitler made it through that, but he did, and he made it through it in such a way to gravitate towards a political leaning that ended up being genocidal. I mean, when you start to, it's actually kind of interesting when you do look at some of the things about Hitler's life that led up to him being, who he was, where he was. You have those moments where you wonder about those tiny little butterfly effect things that might have stepped in to change that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
Um,
I can't remember whether it was before or after the war when he was rejected from art school, but I'm sure
yep,
that
that was a
crushed
big
him
one
too.
too.
He was a
Yep.
good artist.
Oh, he
Not
was.
what they were
Yeah.
looking for, though, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, he wasn't. The thing is, he was certainly a good artist for a dictator.
Yeah, very,
You
very ordered and specific, but not that creative,
Right,
I guess I would
right,
say.
exactly. He seemed to have a real stigma for some things about his artwork as well. In fact,
Very,
there's some
very literal.
interesting psychological studies into what his artwork said about him. There's
Yeah,
some of those videos out there which are really compelling, actually.
yeah. Very,
Yeah,
very technically good, but very literal.
yeah, very
Not.
literal, very to the point,
Hmm.
absolutely. And that kind of thinking that Hitler not only came up into but also kind of cultivated. To me, this is what worries me and what I kind of see. And I'm just going to go ahead and put a stinking, red cross on it right now and just point it out. Antifa.
Yep.
I mean, if I was to look at Antifa and I was to try to basically, how do I put this? Antifa to me is the spiritual successor of every horrible, fascistic, iron booted, horrible group that's kind of just emerged out of society since the beginning of time. The KKK, the Nazis, they are basically just spiritual successors of these types of entities, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would liken them to the Nazi brown shirts, where the
Thank
youths
you.
the youths would dress up and go around beating up people who were saying things that they thought were destroying
Mm,
society.
mm,
And you might be right. Someone might be a racist, or someone might be doing something wrong, but you can't supersede free speech for that.
no,
And
no.
it always starts from kind of a legitimate place where uh, you know, black people were victims in this country, and the Germans were victims. They got completely screwed over in World War Two or World
Mm,
War One,
mm,
Treaty of Versailles,
mm.
and their economy was in shambles. And
Yep.
what I noticed was how similar the Nazi rhetoric was to socialist rhetoric, as they were very, very anti-capitalist, anti-rent-seeking.
Mm,
Um, Lots of stuff like that. If you read through the 25-point plan, and
right.
the alt right today, they're socialists. They're national socialists.
Right.
They want a white a white nation, and
Oh
socialism
yeah.
for whites.
We've had
And
some very toxic ideologies kind of almost just, and this has always been the case though. Like no matter what movement you could point to and say this was a positive progressive thing for society, if you look at it deep enough to the history, there was always a segment of that group that took it a little too far, that did something they weren't supposed to, that took the ideology and really pushed it to its absolutist edges of function. And guys, we have that on the right. Don't think we don't. don't think we don't have, just because we're conservatives or conservative leaning, that we don't have radical basket cases on our side too that are claiming to be conservative when they're really just radicals. Wouldn't you agree, Snake?
That's true. The whole political right wing, left wing, it's very ill defined.
Mm,
Um, like the far right, I do subscribe to kind of the horseshoe theory where the radicals tend to converge, and
mm,
the left right dichotomy is more relevant towards the moderates.
mm,
But the more radical each wing gets, the more they resemble each other and basically become
mm.
authoritarian, totalitarian, tyrannical states.
I like
Uh,
that. I like that. That's
yeah,
fair. I
and
feel like,
that's what really changed my mind. That was the turning point for me in communism.
mm,
Uh, but yeah,
no, that's a really good point. It makes me kind of reflect on the fact that we seem to have lost something in our cultural appreciation over the last 150 years or so, where we kind of had this take that we understood, like all of us as a country, we all understood the importance of the structure that is America, the importance of having the free speech, having the freedom of expression, knowing that because you had the right to say what you wanted, you needed to allow everyone else to have the same right.
mm,
And what I see now on the left side is this push for a full abandonment of that principle. Like allowed to you're not allowed to speak anything that they don't find acceptable, but they're allowed to say anything they want. And
mm.
it's this weird, disgusting, oblivious hypocrisy, in my opinion.
Yeah. There's a huge double standard, and once I realized that, it was like the dam broke for me.
Mm,
Where there's kind of this narrative out there that all the crazies are right wing and all the
right,
racists are right wing, and the left
right.
wing, they're the rational people. And maybe the right wing kind of balances us out a little bit, but that's where the real intellectuals lay.
Right.
And I think a lot of the media gives cover to that too, where they shape the narrative. And
Well,
like,
yeah, I think they kind of shape this narrative that they are the I guess progressed elites, the urbanites, we
mm,
kind of live better, I guess, than everyone else, and then kind of everyone on the right is basically tantamount to farmers and rednecks, basically.
yeah,
You know,
um,
we're all uneducated and unaware and racist. You know?
yeah.
Which, by
Um,
the way, there's a couple atheists out there that think that you're racist simply because of the views that you hold, if you can believe that one.
I'm sure there are. I had someone I was arguing with someone about Stefan Molyneux today,
Mm,
and them just calling him racist and sexist. And I was like, well, can you point to a single actual argument he holds?
right.
And I mean, I have yet to hear back from any
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, and you won't. You won't.
Yeah,
It's all just a bunch of ad hom
yeah,
nonsense. And I think that there is, gosh, I'm glad you mentioned Stefan. I love Stefan.
yeah,
I really do. I mean, in terms of a critical thinker, he just blows my mind. He's so impressive. Like, he's even made me think about a lot of things in very different and dynamic angles. But one of the things I think where the left, particularly the atheistic left, will absolutely hate him is because of his stance that basically we still need objective morality. We still need some sort of framework that the religious right, the religious, Christians of Western society manage to construct and maintain. We need something like that. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the atheists, a lot of the modern hate theists, are more along the lines of no, no, no. We have to eliminate and get rid of all religion if we have any chance at all of a better society. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't particularly like it when especially secular or atheist thinkers, say like, "Oh, I don't believe in a God, but we still need religion for people to behave well."
Mm,
Um, I don't think we do, but the I really dislike uh, moral relativism a lot, and I have a huge bone to pick with a lot of atheists about that.
mm,
I don't think they're quite being creative enough, and I think the irony is that they say that there's moral relativism, there aren't real morals, but they're the ones who act like they have it all figured out, that they have the right answer, and that no one else can possibly uh, speak against that.
right.
And the irony is that the objective moralist people tend to be more like, well, we're flawed, but we have to figure it out. There is some correct answer. We don't know it. We might not ever know it, but we can try and figure it out.
Right. Well, and the especially for them, it's kind of like, and I had a conversation early today with the gentleman at Nero Sean, and we did lightly touch on the morality component of kind of the atheistic realm. And well, the problem with me, the structure for me is kind of like it's almost like trying to build a functional house on top of a cloud. Like what the house looks like. What the house should be shaped of, what it should be made of, how all the plumbing should work and everything. But ultimately, it doesn't seem to ever really be connected to anything. It kind of seems to miss, a really functional type of foundation or framework to start from. And like probably one of the better examples of this is kind of like if you were to compare, like for instance, United States of America's Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights that basically establishes, just unalienable, God-given, absolutely objective rights of each and every single person. And then you kind of draw a dichotomy. You look at the UN, which is not full of any real objective, absolutely has to be statements. It's more about should, could, and would. And the should, could, and would, I don't think is serving the EU very well when, three of their member states that they're giving tens of millions of dollars to every year are engaged in the worst type of child sex slavery in the entire world. Something has probably not gone quite right in terms of applying these subjective moral frameworks. Because again, if it is subjective, if it's subjective, if it's just a could, should, would, what is your real basis for being able to enforce any of it at all?
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that religion is devoid of that, but like I was trying to point out to SJ, if you stop at because God said so, I don't think
Right.
that's good enough either.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed. No, I would agree with you on that.
it's
Absolutely. There,
yeah,
there. I mean, here's the thing: for a Christian, from a Christian's worldview, that has a different layer to it that a secularist maybe not might not always interpret, and that layer is kind of the thing that I think secular morality will always have a hard time synthesizing, and it's this innate, it's the lack of nihilism. It's the sense that every single decision, every single thing you do will ultimately be answered for. If, like for instance, a secularist who has a nihilistic worldview and thinks he can get away with stealing probably will steal, even if he has a moral compunction not to. If it's ultimately good for him and it's a benefit to him and it's tempting enough, he'll go ahead and do it. But someone with a moral framework that's grounded in a semblance of, I guess, almost hidden accountability, there's a extra layer of social deterrent for negative actions or negative behaviors. Does that make sense?
well, I agree with you about nihilism, where that's a lot harder to combat from the secular point of view, but I don't think it's
Right.
impossible.
Right.
Um, but as far as I think there are some points where religious people think they will be held accountable, but at the same token, there's also some points where they think, oh, I'll just be forgiven for it. And
Right.
so I do think
That's
there's a
also
point.
dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there's a point when atheists and secularists say like, well, this is the life that we have, and we're accountable now, here and now, and
Right.
you have to be good for the sake of being good, not
Right.
for the sake of a reward.
Right.
But I think there's some
Well, and
pros and
really
cons
not.
on both sides.
Yeah, I agree with you, and certainly not even just for the sense of the reward, but for the sense of the punishment. Like
Hmm.
the idea that even if you do get away with something, or you think you get away with something, something saw you.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? There is a higher accountability behind you, and it was kind of one of those things where I drew an antidote to it today. You know, if you kind of went back in time to like the 50s or 60s, you know, and you were kind of looking at what the common typical atheists look like, you know, they were respectful. They weren't generally the type that were, even though they didn't believe God exists, they still had enough reverence, respect, and kind of trepidation to where they wouldn't go rip down a Jesus statue or spit in a church. You know, but now it seems like there's just this kind of all holds bar, everything is off, do what you want, even if it's the most irreverent garbage possible. That's what it seems to be the case. We've even lost that sense of common respect of letting each of us kind of just operate on our own belief systems. Now, belief systems have been identified as enemies. And I can't, I mean, what could possibly be more dangerous or toxic to common society?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is kind of the toxic elements on the left. Like, they do feel justified in doing hypocritical things. Like, they don't quite have a coherent ideology, but
Mm,
the thing like words are violence,
mm,
or owning private property is violence. Like,
mm,
that's, well, I was gonna say earlier. Uh, Connected to the Nazis were, I mean, they were socialists,
right,
um, but and they were anti-capitalist, and what they did with that was the Jews were the capitalists, and so
right,
you got to get rid of the
right.
capitalists. So guess what? We got to get rid of the Jews.
Absolutely.
Um, and I do think that there's some use in people believing that they'll be held accountable for their
Right,
actions,
right,
and some danger in like like a serial killer just being, oh, there's no God anyway, I might as well just rape and murder.
right.
But I think when we realize that we're the only ones who are actually going to do anything about it, I think that at least on the societal level, maybe not the individual level,
Mm.
that that gives us more of an urgency to kind of get it right.
What do you think about kind of my take that we probably kind of almost need to, if there was a way to push the leftists, the atheists on the leftist side of the political spectrum, if we could find a catalyst, if we could find something to push them towards that would give them almost a sense of value towards an objective moral code. One of the things I think that it potentially hinges on, and you can help me with this, Snake, is about, I think we touched on it, nihilism. Does your life have value and or purpose, or is your life value and purpose simply only your own? Is it selfish or is it empathetic? Is your life about you or is it about the greater good? And see, without those very, very important questions being asked, someone's moral compass is never ever going to point in the path of something that you guys will probably be able to use. If their moral compass will never ever but always just point to self, to themselves, to what they want, I mean, is that the type of person that you even could apply a functional moral framework to, whether it's subjective or otherwise?
Well, I think so, and I don't think it's a lack of God that's leading to the complete and utter like breakdown that we see on the left. But that is kind of what I see as the weakest point of atheism, and that's what I'm working on a lot is
Mm,
the objective morality. And it's not even necessarily atheist because the model that I'm working in is completely compatible with gods and or any technically any
Right.
god. I mean, certain gods have certain moral codes, but basically what I'm saying is like if the god is correct, it's got a reason, it's got a justification, and if that justification is correct, then that's just correct,
Mm.
no matter what in all possible worlds, and so that's accessible in the atheist worldview as well,
Right.
um, or atheist framework.
Well, and that's
Uh,
that's kind of, yeah, what I was drawing to is that maybe if part of the solution of the atheist moral framework is abandonment of nihilism, finding a way to convince them to abandon nihilistic perceptions of reality. As if to say, because I guess maybe this is part of where I see some of the strengths on the side of a uh, God-centered type of morality is this sense of, I guess, rewarded virtue, where it's not just about not doing bad things. I mean, that's part of it, but the other component is this sense of virtuous reward for being self-sacrificial. Do you know what I mean? like
yeah,
if their purpose, if they had a sense of purpose that was less nihilistic, more purposeful to the benefit of all mankind, like Star Trek,
yeah,
basically like Star Trek type thinking, like that would, like that almost to me is kind of like the highest form perceived of the type of secular thinking that seems to function, that there is still a abandonment of the self for the better good. And that almost sounds socialistic. I get that. Like it really does. I mean, if you apply it to a principle sociological level, it sounds socialistic. But socialism is about force, it's about requirement. And
yeah,
this is about, basically willing benevolence.
yeah, and I think if you do have something that you think is greater than yourself, and at least in terms of truth, then like people, I was talking to someone. He was like, where is self-sacrifice in atheism? And it's like, well, we can care about ideas or nations or peoples or uh, friends and family, and we can still act to preserve those, no matter what we think it came from or it's grounded in.
Right.
And
Well, I feel like there just needs to be that drive. There just needs to be that sense of purpose, that it's not just all about themselves. And, not to make it all about the Muslims again, but kind of bring it back to the Muslims. I had a chat in Discord today with a Muslim in Batman's server, and just completely decimated him on his perspectives. But, one of the things I noticed when I was asking him, this is what blew my mind. And I think it brought a few things full circle for me in my head. When I was asking him about his purpose, what does he feel his purpose in this world was? What was he basically, created for? What is your God have for you as your purpose? What are you ultimately looking forward to? And he's discussing, Jenna and the virgins and the river of wine and all this other stuff. And I said, this is just a sex paradise. I mean, is this your purpose? Is this your purpose in life, to have just been created to attain the highest pleasure?
mm,
Because that's what we see in our country, that I think has toxified everything. This idea to just chase pleasure. There's people that basically who prioritize pleasure in your life, that pleasure is the highest good. What they do is generally they end up being destructive to other people in the process of chasing it. And what more? But what better example could you have of something like that than a suicide bomber, willing to kill himself, take a whole bunch of people with him, so that he can go get his virgins and Jenna?
mm-hmm.
I mean, what more selfish, horrible, hedonistic pursuit could one person be guilty of?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the self is important, and it's about the self, but also there is something greater than ourselves, because
Mm.
obviously the way that I kind of came to it is, obviously people have conflicting interests, obviously people have conflicting ideologies on what is right and what is wrong, and so they can't all be right.
Right.
So
Right.
and so maybe none of them are right. But but then I was thinking like, okay, well if none of them are right, there's still something out there that's making it correct that none of them are right. So there is
Right.
some kind of so I think that there is a logic that can be grasped onto and but
Right.
when you ground things in just pleasure or happiness or pure utilitarianism, I think that's only like a piece of the puzzle.
Mm.
I think that those are important, but when that's your end, I think that you are missing something big, and I think you can ground that in just what is truth.
Right. Right.
And we can go more into that, but
Yeah, that is a tough thing to dissect too.
yeah,
Is what is truth, or even probably maybe even a more important or impertinent question is what is usable truth.
yeah.
You know,
Well,
what is the type of truth that we can not only agree upon but now implement into policies or functional civil practices.
yeah. Well, I think for me that's definitely a huge source of purpose is figuring out purpose and the truth. I mean,
Right.
what greater pursuit is there really?
Well,
Uh,
and from an atheist mindset, the way that you're thinking about it is probably the closest I've ever heard anyone get in terms of a rational synthesization of a justification of holding to a moral code. See, it's not just the existence of the moral code, which by the way is a struggle in and of itself to manifest, but convincing people that there is an inherent need to stick to it. There's something good about it. Like if you do all these things, your life will be better. You see what I'm saying?
yeah, and I even when I'm thinking about these things, I actually assume most of the time that there is a God, and that's
Well,
kind
in
of
your framework, you
because
almost you almost kind of have a God placeholder because you say whatever it is that would make all these things wrong would make something right. This is bigger than all of us. It's kind of outside the metasphere that we're working with. You know what I mean?
well, I guess what I do is kind of more like I do assume there's a God kind of as a check on myself, but what ends up happening is he's more of a middleman, and I
Uh-huh.
assume that he is perfect and knows everything.
Right.
Um, but there's something I don't know if I want to say outside or above him, but it's alongside him,
Right.
if you will,
Uh-huh.
that there is a truth, because God he has to be true if he's
Right.
perfect, and
Right.
so I think that there are these things that are just true because they can't be any other way, and
Oh, yeah, I agree. As in
if a God knows it,
if they were not true, it would somehow violate his nature in a way.
yeah, yeah, and if
Yeah.
a God knows it, I mean, it's it's not irrelevant if a God exists, but it's irrelevant in the sense of like he doesn't make it more or less true.
Mm. 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 Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I mean, from the Christian framework of worldview, is that, and again, I'm not a presuppositionalist. I don't go that
Mm.
road. I don't respect that methodology or that type of argument. But from an internal critique, from my own worldview, yeah, I mean, I have a presuppositional, belief set. It's not part of my argumentation, and it's not part of what I ultimately believe, how I believe. It's just ultimately kind of like my validation tool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like once I'm there and I've kind of come to the conclusion, it's now about looking for whether it can be validated or falsified. And so far, it's been consistently validated. So I lean towards that idea of almost as if, how do I put this? I mean, you've heard Darth Dawkins plenty of times. You know what I'm talking about when I
Yeah.
say this. But like, all of rational thinking is grounded in God. You know, and granted, that's not an argument. That's just an assertion. But it's kind of almost an assertion the from the Christian worldview, the idea that reality, in order for reality to be consistent. In order for the rules and laws of reality to maintain true, there should be something behind that keeps them true. Because then otherwise the rules of the universe, the laws of everything about it, are potentially prone to the same degradation or fluctuation or invariability of the rest of the universe, because we seem to live in a very improbable universe. In fact, I don't know if you saw, I love that channel, What the Math. I forget his name, some Russian guy, but he did a video today on how the laws of nature may not be fluid, may not be static throughout the entire universe. You know, the laws of nature may be relative to us here in our little corner of our relative positioning of the matter of the universe. Now, granted, that's just basically not much more than, philosophical scientific conjecture, but it's interesting to think about that, just like when we look at the quantum level of reality, we see things start to behave in very paradoxical ways. Things that seem to, when we extrapolate in mathematics, they behave like waves. And then when we actually look at them, they're not waves. They behave like particles, as almost as if to say, we can, on the quantum level, we can change reality simply by observing it.
Well, I mean, I agree with most of what you said. And then when I kind of assume that there's a God,
Right.
I I start thinking about what makes a thing good, or what is making the
Like
universe
just
have.
because God calls it good, is that what makes it good, or is it good because it's actually good? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and also just truth, like whatever makes the universe operate, or what you were saying is what sustains. I'm not sure how you put it, but what.
Kind of like what makes the laws of logic stay constant,
Yeah,
instead of fluctuating or basically being anything else than what they are. What makes them stay the way they are, basically.
yeah, and I have no. I don't think there's a conflict between that and a God existing, but I think when you say that it it comes from God, I think that there's a problem there where like it has to already be true for the mind of God to work in order for it to make it true. So it becomes this like circular causality.
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. I think
Yeah.
you're seeing. Yeah, the way that I would try to approach that is to basically rework the angle of the argument into more of a non-temporal type of interpretation. So like God as a non-temporal outside of reality being, there's components of his nature that would be inseparably eternal. So like let me give you an example. Um how can I paint this to where it's really going to be useful here? Okay. So like the Muslims, for an example, they hold to a strictly monotheistic deity, not multi-personal like the Christians do with a triune deity, or even like the Hindus do with their deity. It's a very very singular monotheistic deity. Now, in and of itself, the claim itself has no problems. The fact that it's simply a self existent singular deity. However, then they add a claim onto this deity that completely falsifies the deity itself. They call this monotheistic deity eternally loving. Okay. Now, you would expect eternally loving in the descriptor of God. You expect this to be a eternal factor, a component of his nature, always true because it is part of his nature and he is truth. So anything that is true basically just extends off of whatever his nature actually is. So here's how the love problem falls apart, is that a singular monotheistic God can only be narcissistically loving, self-loving, no type of benevolence or virtuous love at all. It's the only type of love that a monotheistic God can know until he brings something into existence to love, which means that God's loving component of his nature, the truth of his eternal loving component of his nature, can only be true with an object of his love, which means it couldn't be the Islam God, it couldn't be the Muslim God, because he needs reality in order to be loving, which means he can't be eternally loving. Does that make sense?
Um, I suppose. Yeah, I guess. I
It's
see what
more
you're
of a, I mean,
saying.
it's not really more for the atheists, it's more for the Muslims,
Yeah.
but because they like to kind of, usually it's about an attack to the coherency of the triune God as opposed to a monotheistic God. But what you see is that Muhammad was fudging a lot of angles to try and kind of make his theology fit with Christian theology, even though he didn't fully understand it, which is why he basically has some passages that basically allude to a Trinity. And in essence, the way that he refers to, this is the dumb thing where Muhammad really screwed up. He went ahead and referred to Jesus Christ as basically a word of Allah. Now, is the word of Allah created or uncreated? Is it eternal or uneternal? Was it always with him or was it not? Is it part of him or is it not part of him? All these questions start answering, and before you know it, they've created a theological issue that only the Christians have solved, which is that the word of God is part of God, but is not the fullness of God in the word. The word of God takes on a personal shape and form as a component of the nature of God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how we kind of view it. That's why, from our worldview, like when we say, like, because you would almost think, and I have heard a lot of atheists say that, like, why is the Christian God so stupid complex? Like, why is he like this? Why isn't he just, why wouldn't it just be a simple God claim that's easy to get your mind around? And to me, that's part of the validation that it very well might be true instead of false, is why would a God claim try to unnecessarily complicate itself? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's a decent argument. I think of it kind of like what I was saying earlier, like the bootstrapping problem. I think of it
Mm.
kind of like time travel, whereas I don't know what a good example of a movie is. Like maybe Interstellar or something, where like the character will get an object or an event that is
Right.
sent back in time by the character itself,
Mm.
which allows him to do it in the future. And so like it's
Right.
this closed
It's like
loop
a
that like
paradox. Like he requires himself to do it at the first time in order to be able to do it in the
yeah.
future. Right.
So
Right.
it's like it is fiction, but if in order for something like that to happen, I think something outside of that system needs to be in play.
Mm.
And so I think I'm not trying to falsify God with any of my moral stuff.
Right. 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 No,
I
clearly
just
you're not.
I
No,
just
clearly
think
you're
of
not.
it like as if there is a mind of God, it's not. It could still be the most ultimate, most powerful, intelligent being. I just
Right.
think that the idea that it creates itself and truth at the same time. I think is a little bit needs to be worked on.
Well, yeah, and I would say, yeah, I would be careful probably putting it quite that way that it creates truth. I would almost say it's more like truth was just always part of its nature. But like,
Mm-hmm.
like think about it this way: like there is a greater truth. There is a grander truth that probably is kind of outside of the tentative effect of reality. And then there's our local truths. There's basically our perception of truth, and how far we can go to actually pursue or know what truth actually is. And then we're talking more epistemology, as opposed to the existence of the truth. So maybe part of bridging that gap is, in your perspective, can we even really ultimately know that ultimate truth, or are we always just kind of struggling to find it and we're ever just getting closer to it, but it's kind of like the parabola. We'll never quite meet it. We'll never quite get there. We're always just struggling to get closer and closer.
Yeah.
I mean, is that kind of the way you look at it?
Um. Yeah, a little bit.
Do you want me to bring Gavin in?
Sure, if you want. There's still
Gavin.
a ton of political stuff I wanted to get to.
No, no, no. I want to get to the political stuff. I want
Yeah.
this to be a political thing because I've been doing pretty much nothing but religion and philosophy and science, and I need a little bit of a break. I definitely want some of this political stuff because I mean this is important to our society. That this is intrinsic,
Yeah.
and like being able to. This is the thing, guys. Seriously, we're not. We're not ever not going to have atheists, and we're not ever not going to have Christians, and we're not ever not going to have Muslims. Okay, seriously. We're all going to have all these things around us all the time. So, one of the better things we can do is make sure that we keep the lines of communication open and convince the other side that we're not trying to get anything over on them, that we're actually trying to pursue better and greater truth, better and greater, I guess maybe Snake, you would correct me on this, but better utilitarian good. Is that a fair kind of consensus there that it's better to push towards the good of the whole on as much as it is to push for the good of the individual? Like somehow there has to be a balancing act in order for a functional moral framework. What do you think?
I definitely agree with the balancing act for sure. Because there is the individual rights and then there is the greater good, but I think having a coherent treatment of individuals is part of the greater good, and it's
Amen.
directly related and derived
Yeah.
from that.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And that is where a lot of this really comes into play is the balancing act of that. And we can probably pontificate until the sun comes up about what things we think inside our culture are arbitrarily good or bad. But maybe, just maybe, the conversation should take a shape of more which things are of common good or which things are of common bad. And using that exact same dynamic of application of saying, this balancing act of what you're doing has a metric good to the common and what you're doing has a metric good to yourself. Is this something arbitrarily beneficial that we can judge and come to a common meeting of the minds that this is a beneficial act? And let me kind of try and tie a bow on it for you of giving you kind of an example of like a really super negative version. Which basically would probably be a drug addict. Like a drug addict from a secularistic point of view is absolutely living his best life for him. He's pursuing what he wants to do with his life, and who is anyone else to tell him, what he's supposed to do with his life? Now, he may not be arbitrarily correctly judging how destructive his life is on others. He may think of his lifestyle as a victimless crime and ignoring the fact that he doesn't think it's wrong to steal from people occasionally to get his fix on. He has no issue with living completely for himself and doing nothing for anyone else ever. So can we find a way inside, like just as an example of your kind of moral structured framework, how do we convince him, the drug addict, that while it may be for his arbitrary judged personal better good, it's not good for the greater good and therefore should be abandoned? Could you maybe walk me through your perspective of that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a level at which people should be free to choose what they want, and I would even include drug use in that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, we also have the right to stop him from stealing, obviously,
Right.
and if he's harming people in his life, that's also bad. Uh, the only
Well,
other
do you
thing I
do you
would,
think? Well, let me put it this way. Let me try to rephrase it a little bit. If the drug abuse was a catalyst for if we ascertained that the simple act of being a drug abuser gave you a propensity for negative decisions upon society, would we be able to draw a conclusion that this is a behavior that's worth deterring in our society?
Well, yes and no, in a
Okay.
sense, where it's like I think personal choice is a big part of it, but the other level of that is obvious. It is a destructive act on society, and it's a destructive act usually on the individual. Um,
Right.
but the one thing I would add to that is
And I
how
do
destructive.
specify by not just drug use. I do mean like obsessive drug use. I'm not
Yeah,
talking like someone who goes and smokes a joint after work. I
yeah,
mean like someone who's doing hardcore drugs or heroin or something like that.
yeah. The only thing I would add to that is like, I mean, it should be discouraged. It should be prevented. But there is a point at which the cure becomes worse. Like the drug war
Mm,
might
mm.
be more
Oh
destructive
yeah, that is probably a good
and
example.
and
Yeah.
has little to no effect on prevention. Uh,
Right.
in
Well,
that
and
case,
I
so
don't, maybe you would agree with me on this. I don't personally think, and the drug war started when I was a little boy. I was in grade school, probably kindergarten, first grade. I think when George Bush Sr. was in office, and I remember it was a big thing that it was kind of just this whitewash. It was this whitewash against all types of drugs whatsoever. And there seemed to be a conflation of every. You see, when I was growing up, I had this idea that any type of drug, pretty much even pharmaceutical drugs, in some ways were just evil or wrong. And not because it was part of my religious framework or any part of my raising, but just because that seemed to be the cultural push that if you had anything to do with any type of drug whatsoever, you were somehow social scum. This seems to be what kind of prevalated throughout society and pushed a lot of people that basically were just doing nothing wrong, pushed them to the outer fringe of society. You know what I mean?
hmm
Um, so I would agree with you. I think the drug war that we personally instigated, and certainly the way we did it, was one of the more destructive failures, destructive social civil failures of our recent history, personally.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of layers to it.
There is. No, there
Um,
is. Well, and I guess maybe in some ways, Snake, maybe both of us can start to see some of where this collective angst of the left is coming from. They just
mhm.
maybe don't have the brain power to put it into something practical like a policy that we can all actually look at.
I think that they have their own addiction to outrage,
Mm,
and
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
No,
a
I
lot
agree.
of
I think that feels good to them.
yeah, and yeah, I mean it does feel bad sometimes, but you crave it.
Mm,
Like a smoker doesn't after a while, or even a heroin addict after a while, you don't do it because it feels good. You do it because you have to, because you feel bad if you don't get it.
right. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. That is particularly with the withdrawal of some of those drugs. It's absolutely true. And that's kind of one of those things, like some of those drugs where meth is a good example. Like
hmm
you will never quite be the same person ever again once you start doing meth.
Yeah.
Like meth will be your world. Meth will be all you will ever care about. And you will happily basically abandon anyone and everyone around you for the sake of that addiction. So, do we as a collective society say, well, we should go ahead and allow the tweakers to just be tweakers, or we should come to a conclusion of society, no, tweakers are a bad thing, we need to not have this, and we need to go through every effort possible to educate the public of why this is bad, because not only do you destroy yourselves, you tend to inadvertently destroy everyone around you, including your family. The family is all too many times happy to enable the behavior. The son is a drug addict doing meth, going through thousands of dollars, but the mom will still flip the bill to pay the rent to make sure he can stay there for the next month. You know what I
hmm
mean?
Yeah. There's the enabling. I think there's a lot of enabling going on in the left.
I think there is.
Yeah, and it's always a balancing act
Yeah.
because it is bad, but we also have to have the freedom to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes
Mm.
up to a certain point. Like killing someone is not just a mistake, right?
Agreed. Agreed.
In some circumstances, I think you can be rehabilitated from a mistake that bad,
Mm.
but it's a pretty egregious one.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah,
And you
and of
said,
course, circumstance has everything to do with it. Was it
yeah,
manslaughter? Was it first degree murder? I mean, a lot of this comes into play as well. And
yeah,
there's instances where you might kill someone who's in the process of trying to kill someone else.
hmm,
There's always these special case scenarios, and that's why we have courts. That's why we
yeah,
have why we have a legal system, because not every instance is always just black and white, cut and dry.
yeah. I mean,
You know.
what if someone's basically ruined by their environment they were raised in, and they grew up in a gang mentality, and they get arrested? I think they should be held responsible, but I think that
Mm.
they could be rehabilitated. But then there's some people who are just completely pathological. Like they killed because they like the feeling of suffering and taking someone's life, and
Right.
that's someone you just can't trust. Yeah,
No,
on any.
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I had made a point earlier today too that our tolerance for some of this has to do with the structure of our society as well.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, imagine for a moment, for some weird, bizarre twist or turn of events that tomorrow we just all of a sudden no longer had prisons. Like, we couldn't support prisons, we couldn't maintain prisons, we didn't have the guards for it. We had to come up with some sort of different system on the fly. What would we land on? I mean,
Yeah.
the way that I kind of look at it, I think that whatever we would land on would be both better and worse than what we currently have based upon necessity. So, like, as an example, right now, we take all of our prisoners and we stick them in tight, cramped, antisocial environments with pretty much zero chance of social reform. And this is a moral method to handle our social deviance. Now, we could have another system where, say, for instance, it was less penal system and more slavery related, more servitude related, where we could take the people who damage society, and instead of putting them in tight antisocial environments where they are continuing to steal from society by using the tax dollars to support them and keep them there, instead they're put into a work-based situation where they would have to contribute to the society that they damaged. They would have to basically apprenticeship for labor or necessities inside the common public as basically retribution for what they had taken from the society that they had damaged, and now they're giving back to it. However, now there's a double side to this issue of why that might seem potentially more moral. There's now a bigger issue with it. If this was our system, if we didn't have prisons to rely upon, well, we would not be able to tolerate some of the more violent offenders as easily as we do today, because we can lock them in a cage. If we couldn't lock them in a cage, we wouldn't want them to be in common public, even in a servitude position. We'd probably want to kill them. If there was someone guilty of murder or even violent rape or assault, we likely wouldn't want to put them in a situation if we couldn't lock them in a cage like an animal. So it's interesting how our culture, our abilities to manufacture how we can handle our civil morality, how we can handle our even our social deviance, is going to play a big part on how we view our overall morality, how we've decided to structure it over this culture over time. Do you kind of see where I'm going from with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one aspect is our country in particular has a problem with over incarceration.
Mm,
But it sounds a little bit more like community service,
right.
and obviously there's some people you just can't even trust to do that.
Exactly. But I
But
guess
at the
maybe
same time,
yeah, go ahead.
uh, we don't want to make the mistake of just like getting rid of certain people because we know sometimes we execute the wrong people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. In fact, that was one of the things I always found to ring true about the benefits of the progressive, Jewish moral code back in the day when it was generated, was this idea that the laws were strict, the penalties were strict, but convicting someone was difficult. In the sense that, like, there seemed to be in the Jewish culture this kind of perpetual benefit of the doubt always trying to be given to people. And you see this actually when you look at the cultural history of the Jews. Like, the cultural history of the Jews, like, they would consider a really bloody Sanhedrin if it was someone that maybe executed someone once every 80 years. Like, I mean, and even Moses, with the first Sabbath breaker, who was basically clearly just doing it as blatant belligerence to the command that was given. Moses was kind of like, should we really kill him? Like, really? Like, these were not bloodthirsty evil people. They were just kind of like, this is just kind of what we need to do to make sure that there's, order and civility in our society. Like, you have to stick to the rules. If you're willing to deviate from the rules, you're going to convince a whole bunch of other to deviate from the rules. And what's the point of having the rules to begin with? It kind of, there was this sociological limiter that was kind of placed into the implementation of the laws. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you and I are gonna disagree a little bit about
Sure.
the
Well,
Old
it'd be
Testament
boring if we didn't
codes. Yeah,
disagree at all. Come on.
but that kind of brings us back to the origins of this whole thing, because
Sure.
that's I was commenting on slavery, and you were kind of pushing me on, like, do you agree with the UN, or do you agree with like the child sex slavery? And I don't know quite what you were
Well,
referring
no,
to,
yeah.
but
And by the way, that was more about how the coulds, shoulds, and woulds of their 30-point bullet point of this is what the nation should adhere by. And there's plenty of language in these bullet points of saying what everyone should do, what they're all expected to do. But yet, it doesn't seem like a lot of these member nations really care, let alone abide by it. You know what I mean?
yeah. Um, so when you said, like, the child sex slavery stuff, were
Sure.
you, like, the thing that came to my mind was the what do they call it, the grooming gangs in England,
Yeah, no, no.
things like that.
Let me specify a little bit more, and I'll give you the three major countries that are contenders that are doing this. The first one is North Korea. The second one is Burundi, and the other one is Eritrea. And the only reason I know them is really kind of picked up as the top big three on that list is there was an article I read not too long ago, actually published by the UN itself, noticing that they had been, well, basically, they were attempting to explain away or at least draw notion to the idea that they had been giving tens of millions of dollars to these countries that still happen to engage in the worst versions of slavery that they know in the world.
Hmm.
But the kind of the hidden between the lines that you don't necessarily get from the article, which I'm willing to give them credit for, is the fact that the reason these tens of millions of dollars are going to these countries is to try to push the economy or stimulate the economy to no longer rely upon these types of slavery and to enforce good kinds of slavery. So basically, what they're doing is they're saying you can have slavery because your economic system basically can't survive without it, but have it be good slavery, have it be regulated slavery, have it be, stuff full of actual, civil human rights. And that's kind of been the push. And the problem is if you outlaw slavery altogether in one of these nations, which I guess would seem like the practical thing to do with our modern first world morality, but if you did that, all you would do is create an economic vacuum where you would have basically an underground slave market, and you would now basically have taken away all the money that would have gone to entities that would have enforced proper slave usages, proper slave implementation, and would have cracked down on any of the people doing the slave labor. So it's like it's this weird kind of awful economic double-edged sword. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, I'd be a little careful with that, just because, I mean, that was one of the arguments of the Confederacy is like, well, we're dependent on slaves. If we don't have slaves, our economy will collapse, and we'll, you know.
Well, there, yeah,
But
no, I agree what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and for our case, that was not the case. That was a
yeah,
lie.
but
That
there
that
was
wasn't
also
true.
a strong central
Um,
government. So
yeah, there was no, and the reason that that argument didn't hold water is because it wasn't true, and everyone knew it wasn't true.
uh,
We knew that there was a small, loud segment of the South that were the richest, that were the wealthiest, that made themselves multimillionaires on the back of slaves, and they were the ones. I mean, they were the ones basically trying to use the Bible to support slavery when the people on the other side were doing the exact same thing. They were
yeah,
saying, look how the Jews were allowed to buy slaves, we should be allowed to buy slaves. And we're all like,
hmm
well, look at all the parts in the Bible where it says we're all created equal and we shouldn't be treating, you guys have started treating these men like animals. This isn't even what slavery was supposed to be. This wasn't what it was with the Jews. This wasn't the Jews didn't treat people like this. What the hell is wrong with you people? And this was that cultural argument that was, kind of swaying, and the dynamic over there is, was there a reasonable, justified form of slavery, and were we doing it? And the answer was no. So when the 13th Amendment was passed, a really big decision had to be made. Is all slavery bad, or is it just the slavery that we've been doing? And they answered that question when they passed the 13th Amendment. And you read it, they decided that all slavery is not bad, just the slavery the way that we had been defining and the way we have been using it. And that's why they phrased it. They said that all of slavery is abolished except for instances of prosecution and incarceration. So by all legal definitions, as it stands today, when we talk about prisoners being property of the state, that's not colloquial. It's very true. They are slaves of the collective state, of the members of the state.
yeah, and I think there are some problems with that. Like if I had, because even if you're forcing someone to do community service, you can dress it up in fancy language, but ultimately,
Sure,
if you're forced to do that, that is a form of slavery.
sure.
I think there might be some sort of way to make that optional. Like you can go away for 10 years or however long,
Oh, I'd
or
love it.
or
Yeah, no,
do community service
I'd love it if they
and
even
shorten your
kind of
sentence.
allowed for like different types of sentences. Like, and I know there's some judges that do that for kind of like the lighter stuff,
Yeah,
like traffic tickets and stuff. They'll tell them like, okay, you can do 30 days in jail, or you can go sit on a street corner for an afternoon with a sign that says you're a degenerate piece of human scum and you shouldn't have done this, and like that type of stuff.
yeah.
So I know I agree with that. And in fact, I guess that was that's something that we used to use, right, Snake? I mean, kind of wasn't public humiliation kind of part of a deterrent, kind of for like bad behavior? Didn't it kind of used to be that way?
Yeah, I'm not sure quite the extent of it, but like tar and
Well,
feathering
like, yeah, tar
someone.
and feathering, or you
Yeah,
gotta be in the stocks for a while, and everyone looks at you and kind of throws junk at you and stuff like that.
yeah. I feel like that's
Um,
similar to modern cancellation. Maybe it's in some
mm,
instances maybe worse, in some instances maybe not quite as bad. Because
Kind of like modern cancel culture. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
good
I mean a
point.
lot of cancel culture wants people gone forever.
No, that's a good point. No, that's a good point. Well, even want to just destroy their lives, just completely
Yeah,
want to decimate them from the root up. I don't. Can you
or
imagine,
they
Snake?
don't even
Like,
allow for atonement. It's just like you're bad, you're done. Period.
yeah. I mean, can you imagine even just being able to deny someone the chance to say, "Yeah, I used to think like that, and I learned."
Yeah,
You don't even get that credit.
yeah,
I mean, it's just gross to me. I don't. Yeah, this I commend you, Snake, and just so you understand, me as a Christian, I almost even have this little bit of torn morality here on some of this, because part of me wants nothing more than for you to succeed at finding a way to synthesize objective morality that could be gleaned by the fellow atheists, and actually used consistently and to the betterment of mankind. Now, I'm torn by that with the desire that I think the objective morality of Christianity is always superior. I think it's what people should strive for. I think it's what they should want for, and they should want to convert themselves into having that relationship with their Lord and Savior, which just naturally drives them to benevolent living. But if you are really pushing towards the idea of finding a way to establish and synthesize a justification that kind of chases away a lot of this social moral deviance, well, sir, I am your ally, and I'm happy to do what I can to help on that front, because it's not even just about the belief system for me, which it is important, and it is very important to bring people to the loving knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But I also I also think it's important for the survival of our civil society, so that we can continue to preach that. And things like what you're working on have value in that regard. So I just wanted to tell you that, and I wanted to let you know I do actually appreciate you as an individual, and the fact that you do seem to be looking towards or trying to align yourself towards truth.
Well, thanks. That's a high compliment.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's well placed, and you have, based upon our few conversations, I do like you, Snake, and I think that you are working on some very important things.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think kind of the well, to go back a little bit before we move on.
Sure.
I was also going to comment on the funding of those slavery states. I think there is a desire to help them and get them off their feet, so to speak.
Right.
But in some ways, I also think that maybe there's an argument for it that that's enabling them,
Right.
and that maybe it should be allowed to fail in a
Right.
sense, and kind of something better can rise from the ashes. I'm not sure what the correct answer there would be, but
Well, and it's tough because some of these practices, like, and then particularly, like, maybe you might look at Eritrea or Burundi or even Saudi Arabia, where it's kind of part of their culture. It's not even like, even if you could maybe find a way to I guess, catalyze or push the culture forward to where its economy didn't need something so archaic, to kind of keep itself going. But then there's still that issue of, is there that cultural attachment, to having that just kind of always be there? Like, we as America, and even Canada and the UK with their kind of abolishment of slavery, there was a lot of growing pains in it. I mean, our growing pains weren't the same as UK and Canada's. UK and Canada's had a lot to do with the sugar plantations, and the slaves that were there, and whether or not they were treated right, whether or not the plantation owners could survive or manage, what they needed to produce the goods for the rest of the country, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Us, it was much more terrestrial. It was much more local. It was much more, culturally redefined. It's not like, for the UK, it was a bunch of slaves out of sight, out of mind for the most part. For us, we were in it. It was ingrained as part of us. Like, there was the idea of this culture war, nothing like today. There's a completely different dynamic culture war that was fixated around, wait a minute, you guys in the north are trying to cut off our feet. You're trying to keep us from being able to survive. This kind of was the argument. And I mean, they're just drowning in wealth, and they're talking about, how dare you threaten our survival. Like, they knew on a deeply intrinsic moral level, and I do believe this, they knew on a deeply intrinsic moral level that what they were doing was wrong. But it was so ingrained in the culture, it was so ingrained in their way of life and their way of thinking, that the only way that was going to be shattered ultimately was going to be by war.
yeah.
So, I think what we have to look at is not just the moral implications, as much as that is important, but there's also a cultural dynamic that some people may not want to just give up that which has been comfortable for them for 3 generations. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Brenda's here. Brenda. Brenda hates me.
Brenda's got strong opinions.
Yeah, Brenda definitely does not like me. Well, Brenda is a very, very creepy, weird thing that has pulled some weird stuff. So it got called out on it a few times, and so it doesn't like me very much.
Well, I've had mostly good experiences with her, so.
Oh, well, then I won't make you give any opinion on that. Outstanding. Well, Snake, we're at about the 90-minute mark. Do you want to continue? Is there something else that's kind of on your mind that's pressing, or you kind of want to push on for more of a topic? I mean, we've kind of tackled the cultural, political, social, even ethical dynamics of it.
Well,
Do you kind of want to push a layer deeper, or is there you kind of want to redirect
yeah.
a little bit?
Well, I did want to talk about kind of the whole police situation and stuff, and
Sure.
kind of finish what pushed me out of the left.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, please, yeah.
Yeah.
No, let's explore that a little bit, because I think that is really kind of something that really interests me.
Yeah. So we went over, I guess. So I started seeing kind of an attack on comedy and stuff, and then the stuff with Islam. I read the Quran, and it was crazy to me, and I had to rethink. I had to rethink my opinions on, protect the poor Muslims and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of it didn't all happen at once, and so I was still pretty much a communist at that point. And I'm not sure. I think these next 2 points probably happened about at the same time, but I think so. I was involved in the LGBT community, and nothing against them. I think that it's a great community. But I started seeing some things that it started becoming a little preachy and almost like a religion, and it was almost like participating in prayer a lot of times for me, and so I started having to rethink some of those things, and not in terms of like, because I support gay rights, trans rights, stuff like that, but I think that I think it's been infected by a lot of political correctness, and so that kind of pushed me a little bit toward I don't know what exactly, but again, like, I just wasn't affected by the sentimentality of anything, and I was just focused on the logic of it, and so that's always underpinning. And I think where I was most weak with the sentimentality was my anti-capitalism, because I was angry at, like, oh, why these idiot CEOs, they just sit around in an office smoking cigars and making money off our backs and stuff like that. And I think I mentioned briefly, but I had taken a few history lessons, a few history classes. In high school, I took a whole semester-long class on the Holocaust, so I was pretty intimately familiar on the inner workings of that. And then I just hadn't really explored the similarities between communism and Nazism, and I guess I started drifting towards like the anarchist libertarian realm, because I'd always been about free speech, but I started to really appreciate it in a deeper level.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about that a little bit. What about it really rang true to you? Because clearly there was some sort of moral unction to you to kind of gravitate to that.
Well, it's kind of just about, well, if you say something wrong, you should be able to atone for it, and if you say something wrong, people should be able to shine a light on it. And if you cover it up, then it becomes interesting, and people get into a bubble. And I think that these conversations should be in a light. And if you say, oh, you can't listen to that and stuff like that, people don't. If it's bad, if it is legitimately bad, people don't learn how to argue against it. It's just locked away in a cage, and you have no defense against it. So that's another thing. And the final thing, I guess, is if you do make a move against free speech, then you become a tyrannical country.
Right.
And I was one of those communists, what they call a tanky, where I was like, oh, the revolution will happen. We'll just storm over them and take what's ours back. And yeah, and I guess what happened was I started to become more aware of that my values were libertarian minded and freedom minded, and I was like, wait, so if we're gonna have that kind of revolution, we're gonna have to be the dicks.
Right.
We're gonna be the baddies.
Right.
And I had taken a Russian history class, and at that point it still wouldn't connect. But when I was listening to, it's called A Part of the Problem
Right.
podcast with Dave Smith,
Right.
and it kind of hit me while I was listening to that, whereas like, right, that's what I want. Is I basically wanted Stalinism, but I hadn't connected it, and I wanted to be part of what I was thinking about was going to become authoritarian, and so that was against my more core principles of freedom and peace. So I basically had to rethink a lot of it, and I was able to reframe capitalism in more of a, I think of it mostly as evolution now, where the successful models will proliferate, and the ones that are able to cooperate with more will also increase their fitness. So I still retained a lot of my socialist ideals, but I kind of changed. I think of it more as communityism, where I would like to see more localized, more local focused capitalism, like people getting their food from their neighbors around them, and
Oh, I like that.
businesses being more fractured, and even
Yeah.
governments being more fractured and more local. Whereas instead of like these huge conglomerates that own the government, that are putting small business out of business, and through taxation and through regulation. And
Oh, I love that.
I just
Yeah.
kind of did a complete 180 in a pretty short amount of time, but there was a lot of stuff leading up to it, and but I think I was always open to challenge my assumptions too.
Well,
Um,
that's good. That's progressive. That's something that I wish a majority of the left would do. You
yeah,
know, if they weren't so religiously tied to these, ideas, then maybe they would step back because it
yeah,
sounds like again you kind of had a moment of self-actualization. You step back and said, "Wait a minute, what am I really promoting, and is this good? Is this what ultimately is good for me or society as a whole?" And you rationally decided, no, it isn't.
hmm and I was kind of primed also with getting into more modern stuff, like getting into libertarianism. I think I was primed to give up some of my socialist and more leftist, and I say leftist instead of liberal because I consider myself a liberal but not a leftist.
Right.
Um, but I voted for Obama. I was an Obama fanatic, and I think I was a little bit primed for that when I started to get into anarchy, because uh, basically for whatever reason, I think, again, I loved Obama, but I wasn't emotionally attached to this idea. I always liked finding subversive elements. So
Mm.
I started looking into, like, well, Obama's just as bad as all the other, just as bad as Bush. He continued all the wars. He lied to us. You know, there's
Right.
nothing noble about drone bombing a hospital.
Right.
Just and I saw him as, you know, maybe he had good intentions, but he
Right.
became part of the machine anyway.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe he had no choice, but he's the figurehead and he signed off. Whatever.
Right.
But it's the whole system. It's
It is
the
a system. Yeah.
industrial war complex,
Right.
and
Well,
that's
yeah.
basically
Well,
taken over our whole country, and that also has shaped a lot of my politics too.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And our culture will shape our politics too. It'll
Yeah.
also shape our values. on what it is that we decide is important to us. And like I had kind of made this argument with the vegans, those annoying vegans, when I debated them on modern day debate, is that when you're gonna propose something as a greater moral good, you also have to understand the moral implications from its implementation. It's one thing to say I perceive a greater moral good based upon my worldview and my perspective, and I want to push everyone towards it. That there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's something very noble and virtuous about it. However, is it really actually the ultimate good? Like, has it been surveyed closely enough? Is there economic and environmental impact reports and considerations for the policies that you want to implement? Or is it just feelings noise that's, trying to take the shape of legislation? How much forward thinking is really being used in some of these policies? Now, I'm gonna go ahead and mention it because maybe it's something good for us to touch on real quick. Chaz.
Hmm.
Is Chaz not a beautiful exposition of how grotesquely useless leftists are at making anything work or function?
Yeah, it's because they have no principles. They're just lashing out.
Right.
It's there's not much more to it, and they are hypocrites. Like, they don't understand what really abolishing the police means, and
Mm,
I'm on the fence between anarchism and like minarchism, where they're
mm,
just as minimal government as possible. But and so there are some theories of how you can make it work without the police,
right.
uh, but they have no idea what replacing the police actually looks like. And so
Right.
immediately they had their own security force, and they started shooting people and being
Yep.
police brutality, and they killed
Yep.
more black people per capita per time period than the actual police do,
Yeah. Yeah.
including
Exactly.
not to forget the other people they brutalized, but
Well, and
just to
not
put it
even
in
to
terms of their values.
yeah, and also not to forget the just bloodbaths that have ensued since a lot of the defund the police, cops leaving, cops quitting.
Hmm.
I mean, all this the pulling back of the police has not made these areas safer or less violent or less bloody or
Yeah.
less murderous. In fact, quite the opposite. And for the sake of one black man dying, George Floyd, which was certainly horrible in all of its own rights, but to have now stretched that into policies that are now murdering black people across the nation does not make practical sense to me.
Yeah. And I've marched in 3 Black Lives Matter protests, but that was
Mm,
some years ago. Um, back back then they would actually chant Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter,
mm,
alternating back and forth.
mm,
And since
mm.
then, All Lives Matter has become associated with somehow, just completely bafflingly, somehow it means that Black lives don't matter,
Right,
according to the extreme leftists. And
right.
so I actually, ironically, was more of a police supporter back in my teenage days, because I was like,
Mm,
oh, I've only had good interactions with the police, which was pretty much nothing.
right,
Um, and then they hassled me, and I started being like, oh, okay, like I get what
mm,
people are saying now,
right.
and
Well, it's
and I
interesting.
started
You
getting into kind of the anarchist libertarian stuff, and
right.
and so I like to speak from the left when I'm talking to the left, and but from the right perspective, I'm not anti-cop, but I think that there's a lot of problems with the police. But from arguing from the right's perspective, it's like, remember Ruby Ridge in Waco, where the
Right,
cops are not your friends,
right,
at least the way it is right now. It's I
right.
think I think we seriously need to rethink separating security services and separating law enforcement services.
Mm, mm,
And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is doesn't have a very good solution to this, where it's just okay, just defund the police. And I
Right.
think in some sense the police are over militarized, but they're also like they seem underfunded, because
Right.
I think not having a partner and it's just a lone cop by
Right.
himself, I think that makes him more paranoid and more of
Absolutely.
an itchy trigger finger. Um,
Absolutely.
and that certainly doesn't help.
I agree
And
with you.
yeah.
I agree with you. In fact, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I would say everything you said was 100% spot on. And I would even add this, that if there was something probably essential to be reformed, I would say. By the way, that's a brilliant point you make, Snake. Really, truly is brilliant. The idea that to go ahead and fund the police more, so that they're not strained, they're not taxed, they're not spread out too thin, and they can operate with an even greater standard of professionalism and dignity. There's something
Mm.
truly to be said for that, and that's a brilliant point you made.
And more time training too. That
Thank
they
you.
spend too much
Yes.
time on the beat. They need
Thank
to
you.
learn how to de-escalate things.
Thank you.
But I
Yes.
also think there's, in terms of separating like security services, like you could give them different jobs. Like there's this private company. I'll have to get you the name. I'll put it in the comments later. But
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
the owner was talking on one of these libertarian podcasts. I think it's called Death to Tyrants.
Mm.
Um, and he was talking about how his company essentially all they do is show up and de-escalate situations, and
Mm.
so they get people home safe. They they end fights and conflicts safely, and that's all they
Right.
care about. They don't care about writing people tickets. They don't care
Mm.
about really even holding people accountable. They just care about making sure it doesn't escalate into an unsafe situation and getting people, like if they're drunk driving or something like that, or if they're trespassing, they just want the people to go their separate ways and be safe.
Right.
And they've never had a problem ever.
Well,
They've never had to call the police, but the police would be there in case someone, starts
right. Well, and
shooting.
that's, and I've heard that argument, and I think it's actually almost a little bit more of the more reasonable ones from
Mm.
the left, which is that do we necessarily need to have a, armed policeman show up to every single call? Or
Yeah.
are there some calls that are mundane or simplistic enough that basically just kind of hired security, even unarmed hired security could show up and attempt to handle it, and if it's
Mm-hmm.
something that's out of their hand, they get to call for backup and the big boys come running. But could we maybe have some sort of, like, for instance, let me put it this way. Let me try to rephrase before I go down this road. Um, let's say we had these, let's call them peace officers, and maybe they're not armed, maybe they just basically have a billy club. But if you did something to them, you would be punished like 3 times as bad as if you did something to a cop. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there would be some sort of like extra layer of like super deterrent. Like, when these guys show up, because they're there to be peacekeepers, if you attack the peacekeepers, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
You're done. You are now social cancer. We're locking you away. We're done with you. I think you could structure something almost like that, and it could almost, certainly in my mind, verge at least on the realm of reasonable, as a practical kind of solution to, I guess you would say, integrate common people, common society, regular people into, peace officer work, to basically kind of give them the power. They'll have the power to go out there and make peace, but they won't necessarily have the power to force it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like they can be there basically as the party to do it. They can apply force if needed, but at the same time, they're kind of not the same thing as the police. Now, I don't think the police issue. Here's my issue, and I've been saying this now for years. I haven't. Granted, I understand the necessity of the police. I've never said defund the police, get rid of the police. I've never said anything, anything radical like that. But for years now, I have been screaming that we should reform the police. And if there was one thing I see, and maybe you can give me your take on this, Snake, if there's one thing I see that's really kind of dangerous in the side of the police is basically just the semblance of cop culture, where
Yeah.
there's this idea where the thin blue line is a big thick metal wall, and we all do what we do behind here, and we all kind of try to protect each other. We invested ourselves and found that we did nothing wrong, type of mentality.
Mhm.
And that has maybe betrayed a lot of the public trust in the police by them operating that way. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be helped by separating security and law enforcement a little bit. And I also think it's kind of like the social justice warrior mentality, where they they're just up, they're geared up for war. They have a side, and the criminals are on one side, and even civilians are on one side, and the cops are on another side.
Right.
And so they're just primed for a bad situation.
Well, I guess I don't understand this weird kind of absolutist view that the cops are just enemies and that's all they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know where this mentality is kind of coming from, that you can just be so extreme and that it's just somehow acceptable. I don't quite get it.
Well, it's definitely easy to fall into that when you're like you get hassled by police, and a lot of people, that's kind of the only interaction they have with the police is, oh, he's gonna give me a ticket, which is
Right.
essentially robbery. I mean, you can
Right.
argue whether it's a justified robbery or not, but definitely pisses me off when I get a speeding ticket. But at the same
It
time,
pisses me off when I get a ticket for something like mundane and stupid, like 5 miles over, because
yeah,
then it's just someone being petty.
yeah,
And this is where the enforcement, I think, really falls into play. And this is a good point you bring it up. Like, at what point is our judiciary even being cognizant of the fact that maybe there's just some garbage cops that are being petty, stupid people,
yeah,
and then they're giving a bad reputation to the public, and the courts are just backing them because that's just what they do.
yeah. I think there could be some sort of police review system as
Oh,
well.
thank you. Yeah, I
Uh,
like that. Yeah.
Even maybe
I
we
would say
maybe
a
we
police
can,
review system that's external to the department.
yeah. I mean, maybe we can even vote out certain police officers, right?
Mm,
Something like
mm.
that. Um,
I actually like that. I
yeah,
actually like I like the idea of officers being at, in some way, shape, or form, and I don't know how we could possibly structure something like this, but I love the idea of the cops service being at the behest of the citizens.
mm,
Basically somehow upon, the citizens vote that these are good cops or trash cops. Because
yeah. It's kind of
like,
like
it's
they,
doesn't it seem like a bunch of really trashy cops with really trashy records seem to keep getting hired everywhere?
yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how you could do this, but it should be a culture of protect and serve. But then there are some
Mm,
people who see it as, oh, I'm the savior. I'm the big guy with the gun, and I'm gonna make
right,
things right.
right,
So I'm not sure how you could quite get rid of that, but there's the problem is some people see
right,
themselves, it's self-righteousness,
right.
and you know they get
I
out of
think,
control.
yeah, I think cops in general do many times have a severe self-righteousness problem, and I
Yeah,
think it's not really necessarily anything to do with their character. It might have to do with a byproduct of the job. That, I guess, if you feel like you are the law, you are the enforcement of the
yeah,
law, that
mm,
maybe the law doesn't quite apply to you or mean the same thing to you as it does to everyone else, and that can be very dangerous thinking.
mm. Yeah, and those are all legitimate problems. And what pisses
Right.
me off about the left is we have this opportunity and all this momentum to address this, and there are a lot of people addressing it.
Right.
But it seems to be taken over and infected by this, by the leftist mentality, by the whatever you want to call it, the toxic culture. And
Right.
I've heard a few people Brett Weinstein and the guy Atheism is Unstoppable, I think, coined the term of racism of the gaps, where any problem is essentially seen as, well, it's explainable by racism. And so, of course, all their solutions are just not going to address the real problems, because any unknown, any problem is just explained by this one thing.
Absolutely.
And it gets, they put their focus in the wrong way. And I think that at least the Democrats and some officials want to focus on that, and especially some people in the media want to focus on the more divisive solutions, I guess, or conversations about the topic, because they're invested in a divide and conquer tactic where they can keep the status quo because they don't want anything changing. They know how to compete now the way it is, but they don't want to learn how to compete in a new way. So they want the status quo. And the one way they know how to do that is to get us to fight each other instead of converge and work together on a problem.
Amen.
And yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's weird to almost be, I don't know, counterproductive to actually like making things better. I mean, it's not like it's so weird because it's almost like the cry of the left is no one cares. Like we have to make all this noise, we have to burn everything down because we're not being listened to, and we're all saying we're listening to you, but you're not proposing any policies that we can use. You're just a bunch of noise right now. Stop being noise, give us something we can use, and we're on your side. Like, I mean, again, even though I'm on the right, I've been clamoring for police reform for years. I think there's lots of things I see inside police culture that are very disgusting to me. But what's been done about it at this point and the policies that are being progressed, I don't see any of this as helpful. Like this is like the opposite of helpful. Like we're supposed to kind of maybe be going the other way than what we're going, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it actually, I think that the left is the most racist, at least in terms of the visible things, because the right seems to be able to get rid of people who are too far right, who are like racists, but it doesn't seem like there's a point on the left where you can go too far, because it's always in the name of a very sentimental thing. It's like, okay, well, you can't criticize us because otherwise you're racist, and you don't want to be racist, do you? And so they can manipulate people like that.
I have zero issue drawing attention to a racist bigot on our side.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. This is the weird thing I've noticed, and maybe you'll back me up on this, but the racists on the right are really, really proud of being racist. Yeah. Like they advertise it. They advertise their nationalism, their white pride, that type of stuff. And I'm talking the real extreme edges of it that claim to be conservative. I mean, I don't even think there actually could possibly be labeled anything close to conservative, but this is where they claim to be. So they say these are all the things that we want and push for, and they're very, very vocal and they're very loud about it. But on the left, it seems like they're always trying to hide their racism. It's always inside, between the lines, inside the nuance. Like you actually have to look for it, but it's there, type thing.
Well, it's always paradoxical with the left. It seems like they're anti-racist. They call themselves, but ironically, they're almost proud about it because like this propaganda where all white people are racist, and this is said by white people, and if you deny that you're racist, well, you're just proving that you're uncomfortable with being called racist, because we all have an inherent bias, and it's so they want it's almost like an original sin where they're saying that we all have it, but we're supposed to purge ourselves of it, and they're telling us that we have it too. We have this disease, so we have to take their medicine for it, and it's become so pathological. Like, I don't know if you've seen this new thing from the Smithsonian where, and this was part of the leftist culture for a while, but the Smithsonian Museum is now repeating this rhetoric where now they're saying white culture is working hard and keeping time and schedules is white culture, and it's just kind of demonizing these values that generate success. And so it's almost perpetuating the stereotype of colored people as lazy and perpetually late and things like that, and it's also saying like it's a bit white supremacist because you're saying all these things that do generate success on their own, well, that's all invented by the white people. The Asians, they didn't ever keep schedules, so that was all invented by white people. They didn't work hard. That's the invention of white people, and it's such an insidious racist thing, and it's hard for the people on the left, the leftists, to notice it because it follows from a lot of their rhetoric.
Right.
And
yeah,
they
don't like
think
to,
it's good, but
yeah, they don't like to address the whole Asian privilege part of society. That kind of breaks a lot of that dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah, or the other thing that they said was science and rational critical thinking is an invention of white culture, and that I can't think of anything more demeaning than saying that minorities don't think rationally and don't work hard. Like, it's getting out of control. And I think that while that does follow from a lot of the leftist stuff, I think when it goes that far, like, I think there is some legitimate like infiltration going on there, like that's deliberately subverting American culture. Like,
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And what are we replacing it with too? Is that's not what I can ever seem to get an answer from. It's kind of like they'll scream and yell, make a bunch of noise about how bad things are, and when you ask them like, okay, well, how do we make it better? They're just full of terrible ideas. You're like, oh, well, get rid of the police. That's not a solution.
And
that sounds like an emotional, compulsive solution, but that's not a solution.
And if you give them what they want, it's never enough. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and they'll keep going and keep ratcheting it down. And people, I think this is the other thing that pisses me off with the moderates and maybe even the right and the rational people on the left is they just give into it because I think that needs to be called out almost as much as the SJW stuff, because it's a form of weakness, but it's what allows them to take power. You're giving them the power. And if you don't stand up now, it's going to be harder to stand up tomorrow, and it's going to be harder for everyone else who they target next. And you might be saying, well, I'm not going to stand up this time because I don't want to be the target. And basically that gives cover for the next person that they're going after, because you've already kind of tacitly endorsed this kind of behavior. And it's rational to say, okay, well, I'm going to save my skin today, but at the end of that, they're going to come back for you, and then there will be no one left to stand up for you. It's like that poem out of the you know what I'm talking about? First they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. Because I was not a Jew. And I see that happening again today. And even going back to the Chaz a little bit, like what do they call them? The couple that were brandishing their weapons. They were holding the guns.
Oh yeah, because they broke down the front gates and started coming in.
Yeah,
so they're ready to defend their property. Yeah,
and everything they did was legal, but the police showed up, and I don't know if they got arrested, but the police showed up for them and confiscated their weapons. I think they might have even got arrested, and so it's like everything's being flipped on its head.
Yeah,
and whether the police are kowtowing or they're being ordered to do it by a politician who's kowtowing, it's not good. And I think it's only going to get worse until people start standing up.
I agree with you. Yeah.
I don't think it's going to come from our politicians, because the mayor of Seattle, I think it's the mayor or the governor, she was saying, "Oh, it's going to be a summer of love. The Chaz, we'll see how it turns out." She was basically supporting it until they showed up to her house to protest, and then she shut it down. So
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how that works? She's fine with everyone else's properties and businesses and nonsense being destroyed, but once her house is under threat, better jump on it. If that isn't just pure elitism, I don't know what is.
And it's like, what about the black lives who you've destroyed their business? Those lives don't matter. Only like the less than 20 lives that were less than 20 unarmed black people who were shot in a year.
Right.
Like it's not a insignificant thing. They deserve justice, but other lives. There's a lot of other lives who were ruined by the backlash from that too.
Absolutely.
I think even George Floyd was saying that a lot of these problems are caused by the black community itself, and obviously I don't want to blame it on because they're minorities, but
to me, I would say there is a cultural deviation that is part of the catalyst of that. There's the acceptance of typical antisocial behaviors as being acceptable and tolerated. And that in and of itself, like theft in an urban center community as a cultural issue is not a problem. Like petty theft is not an issue, not even glanced at. That's a problem. That really just drags an entire community down the gutters, slowly but surely, just bleeding it dry with this type of cultural norm. There's something to be said for as you're kind of putting a focus and importance on it, of synthesizing this more moral structure. Is let's try and drag the culture back from these allowances of evil that ultimately bring us all down. I'm going to let Snake kind of take a little bit of the last word approach, because if there's something that he wanted to kind of wrap up on or finish up on, or something really important that maybe we didn't tackle yet, I kind of want to give free rein to him. But if you guys don't have any questions, we're just going to move towards that. So if you want to come in and pitch something, there's the link in the description. Come in and do so. Snake, I really loved this. I'm so happy that we got to do this and really kind of explore some of these things, and also even for me to get a little bit more familiar with some of your worldviews and perspectives, which I think are so compelling, because I have so much respect for people that will find a way to drive themselves towards a rationalization of the reality, to not just go with the flow, and I see you not doing that, which is contrary to what your peer group tends to do. So you kind of, just in terms of your choice of behaviors and the way that you're operating, you certainly do have my respect, sir.
Well, thanks. I mean, in many ways, we've only scratched the surface. Like you have no idea.
Right. No, absolutely.
Well, the one thing I wanted to say on the topic we were just on is, I think there is some legitimacy in when the leftists will say, like, "Oh, you need to listen to black voices," and I think we were talking about the problems in the black community, and while I don't think it's legitimate to say that they're the only ones who can comment on it, I think truth is objective, that it's not just up to a personal experience, but the voices that I hear talking about actually willing to address that the problems are in the black community, they tend to say that it is a problem of family values. And I think a lot of them recognize that there's some enabling of bad habits going on by the government, and some lingering problems that have been carried over from Jim Crow and slavery.
Absolutely. No, there's arguments for that for sure.
Yeah,
For
and while I
sure.
think that's true, I don't think that it's impossible to overcome if someone has good a good family foundation and good work ethic. So
Well,
I
good
think,
character,
yeah,
good character, which is what flows from those things you
yeah,
just mentioned.
and
Yeah,
one thing is the over incarceration of fathers. So that also
right.
contributes to not having a good influence in the home. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, the
but then that's
breakdown,
war on drugs and yeah.
yeah, the governmental attack on the nuclear family
Mm-hmm.
that happened even under Lyndon Johnson and progressed even up until the current day has all been about trying to tokenize black people as tools of political influence. And instead of trying to drive towards better living, better standards, better structures, like you get a sense very, very quickly that the left the left leaning Democratic Party is all about satiating feelings, not about ultimately doing what's best for people. And that comes through in their policy planning and what they choose to implement. And I think you're so spot on, Snake, that there's kind of been this systematic destruction of the African American culture in this society. And now we've reached almost like a breaking point with it.
Yeah. I also think that the Democrats really take them for granted and use them as a tool
Right.
and use that narrative.
Right.
Um, there was a lot of Trump stuff I wanted to cover too, so maybe.
Oh well, no. If you want to go into some Trump stuff, bro, let's go into some Trump stuff. No, please, absolutely. If you wanna unpack some Trump stuff, let's do it.
Well, I'll try to cover it quickly. So
Sure.
the other thing that I think was what really nailed the coffin, put the nails in the coffin of
Right.
me leaving the left, because all of this other stuff was like kind of priming me,
Hmm.
and there are leftists who are capitalists, or well,
Right.
I don't. There are liberals who are capitalists.
Right. Right.
um, but during the 2016 election was kind of a huge turning point for me too, uh,
Mm.
where I was already against Obama. I had turned on Obama, and I wanted to also add, like, to his continuance of the Bush wars. He also started more wars, but also he was probably, well, he was the deporter in chief for one. He deported a lot of
Hmm.
people, so
Mm.
there's hypocrisy there.
Right.
The kids in cages, that was started under the Obama administration,
Right. Yep.
but also he was the worst president ever for censoring journalists and putting whistleblowers in jail, and you
Oh,
never hear
big
about that.
time. Yeah, for sure.
And that's just, like, I have a lot of respect for whistleblowers because they really put themselves on the line.
Amen.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm always looking for to prove myself wrong. So the other thing with Obama is the birtherism, and I'm not quite a birther, but if you look up the Sheriff Arpaio giving the presentation of, he was the guy in charge of verifying the Obama birth certificate, and
Mm.
there's some interesting stuff. I can't tell if I'm being tricked or not, but
Mm.
there's some really sketchy stuff about the Obama birth certificate,
There
and
is. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
and it really is. I had to double check, and I looked it up, and I looked up birth certificates on Google, and then I looked up the one the White House gave, and it looks fake. Like,
Mm.
it's just, and
Well,
the whole
even
thing
even
was,
document analysts said it looks fake.
yeah,
I mean, this is a professional opinion as well.
two separate ones that were foreign, like Italian, and so they weren't like mixed up in U.S. politics. And they
Right.
used different methods, and two different agencies came to the same conclusion. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but I'm willing to take the evidence as it comes, because I just, I don't know. It's interesting.
No, I agree with you. We have a question from LPP, my boy Maddox, of course. He says, questions for both. He says, do you guys think expanding options for criminal record expungement would help solve the serial criminality problem?
I think that that would go hand in hand with drug war reform and things like that.
I'd agree with you. I think
Yeah,
there should be a way to allow people to redeem themselves. I think
yeah,
that's one of the things we've kind of deprived people of is that when you are labeled a felon, you're always a felon. You'll never be anything else. Even if you may have done something
mm,
substantial to improve your life and get yourself back on track, that label will stick with you and deter you from actually being able to maybe be a better productive member of society. It's harder to get work, it's harder to be trusted. So
yeah,
there should be some sort of path for someone to be able to clear their record. And that's one of the things I think we really are missing, considering the fact that felon status will be a stigma that'll attach itself to you for the rest of your life.
yeah. I mean, I'm a big proponent of like if you've served your time, you've served your time. Like
Right,
if you think that they should still be punished, then they should probably still be in jail.
right,
But yeah, I don't think if we decriminalize or even legalize a lot of these nonviolent crimes, um, then it's not fair for people who were convicted of it back then to still be in jail. So
right.
I think that's
And I,
kind of what he's talking about.
I agree. And I think you would probably, and that's a brilliant point. I'm with you 100% on that. I think once you've done your time, you've done your time. I
Mm.
completely agree with you. This bringing it back to the Trump thing.
Mm.
Now, for you as the person that was on your kind of political path of kind of realization, did you kind of just like coalesce to your realization at the time that Trump came around, or did you kind of know, like, did you kind of have more like Trump-ish type thinking before Trump was even up on the ticket?
Well, I'll try and sum it up like this. Maybe this is a good example. I used to hate Judge Judy because I thought she was a dick. And then over time I thought that she was great because she's a dick.
Right.
And in a way, yeah, cuz she just tells it like it is kind of. So I used to be a little bit more sensitive to that. Um, but I will say I had already been losing faith in the Democrat Party,
Right.
not the Democratic Party, mind
Right.
you. Uh,
Right.
and so I'd lost faith in Obama. I thought Hillary was a complete and total villain. Um, and we could talk for hours about that. And
Oh,
the way
could
she
we?
cheated Bernie and
Yep.
all the corruption going on at the DNC.
Yep.
Uh,
And even just her time in Secretary of State was a disaster in and of itself.
yeah, so I wanted her to lose
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And I started off thinking that Trump was. I. Okay, so I didn't like him at that time because he seemed to me as an overly sensitive person because of
Mm.
he had been called an orangutan by Bill Maher and since I and I'm not sure what I thought about the birth certificate at that. I think I started changing on that halfway through the election. So
Gotcha.
at that point, I also thought he was kind of a racist for the birtherism stuff
Right.
and for his initial comments about Mexico sends in rapists.
Right.
But it didn't take long for me to think about that, where he had the word choice was poor. I'll
Right.
say that, but
Right. I
he
would agree.
actually was
I
not
would
saying
agree.
that Mexicans are
Yeah.
bad people.
Exactly.
So I plus I really just hated Hillary. So yeah,
I was the same way in 2016. In fact, 2016 was the last year that I had a Twitter account. And my whole Twitter account was basically about crapping all over feminism, the left, and Hillary Clinton. That
yeah,
was that was that was pretty much the primary theme of my Twitter account because I was enraged, and I do mean enraged, that someone I had thought was tantamount to a criminal that should be behind bars was about
Yeah.
ready to maybe ascend to the highest, power authority structure in all of the nation. It was really, really troubling me. So, what was the greatest method of outreach to me at the time was Twitter.
Hmm.
So, it didn't take me long to get banned, and it didn't take me long for my second account to get banned. So I just kind of gave up.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about feminism really.
Mm-mm.
Um,
Oh, we could fill just hours with all these topics,
yeah.
man.
Well, and it was so offensive to me that she would literally print off woman card, playing the
Oh,
woman card as a
right,
joke, and
right.
so
How
full.
detached? How
Yeah,
detached are you?
yeah. Full disclosure, I ended up voting for Jill Stein for the Green Party,
Oh, I believe
which
it. I believe it.
mostly a protest vote.
You should have
Um,
just lied. You should have just lied and said you voted for Trump.
yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna have to vote for him this time. Although the libertarian candidate Jo Jorgensen looks pretty promising, but she did
Yeah.
say something pretty woke recently, so I'm gonna have to.
Mm, you have
Yeah,
to reconsider
I mean,
that.
I
Oh,
live
so
in a
you
state
so you
where
won't be voting for Dirty Joe? Come on, man. Give Joe a
uh,
break.
we
We can
there's
tell he's innocent. We just have to go smell his fingers.
yeah, I mean, everyone already knows what's wrong with Joe, so there's no
Yeah.
need to go too much into that.
No, there's
But
there's there's lots wrong with Joe
he's
and that whole camp.
if he wins there will be no one standing against the leftist agenda. He'll just roll
Yeah.
over and just
Oh
let it
yeah.
happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Well, he kind of is, and if you saw, I don't know if you saw recently his whole kind of release statements about what he's planning to do with his administration. And he pretty much already has. It's basically just
yep,
rolled over for whatever the left wants.
yep.
The extreme left
Well,
wants. And,
it's so ironic that as soon
the
as
centrists
Hillary,
don't want that, right, Snake? I mean, the centrists aren't buying into this
oh yeah,
garbage, right?
I mean, one of my best friends she's pretty liberal, but I mean, she's also kind of getting red pilled on like how terrible and hypocritical the Democrats are, but she hates burning, just with a burning passion.
Right.
Um, I don't agree with his socialist politics, but I favored him because he seemed like he was going to be an outsider, and that's kind of like
Right.
what I like about Trump. But
Right.
it's so ironic that the the moderate candidates, as soon as they won, as soon as Hillary and Joe pretty much secured the nomination, they just go and recruit Bernie for them and try and take over his talking points. Like it's
Mm.
so transparent that all they want is the power, and they'll use Bernie's people to get that power.
I couldn't agree more. I
So
couldn't
yeah,
agree more. There is kind of almost seemingly like a bit of a civil war. I mean, it's almost like a hidden civil war between the more silent, reasonable Democrats who are just kind of letting the leftists kind of drive the clown car.
yeah,
Like they've kind of just taken a seat in the back seat, and they don't really want to say anything bad about the leftists because it's part of their party and it would violate kind of the religious norm, which you can't go outside the group think type thing. So like if you're part of the party, you have to be part of the party, and you have to be all inclusive, including all inclusive to radical insane leftist ideologies apparently.
yeah. And I just said someone talking about Bernie in the chat, and I just said, and Bernie turned out to be weak because he's now turning around and helping the
Right.
people who betrayed him and who
Right.
take him for granted and give him no thanks.
Right.
And he'll kowtow to the far left as well, because
Yeah.
even he is fairly moderate. He was saying open borders is a bad thing
Right.
until
Right.
they threatened to cancel him.
Well, yeah, and he got swayed on some of his more practical stances from that. And I guess that's maybe why I lost what remaining respect I had for him. I mean, I might have been able to glance over showing up at the DNC in a $250,000 sports car, but
Mhm.
while he's preaching about the wonders of socialism, I might have been able to ignore even that.
Yeah,
But the fact that his so-called really, really strong gutted compulsions of what the country needed were basically just swayed in an instant.
Hmm.
I mean, it was a real quick thing for him to basically just turn around and, his whole thing was his whole thing the whole time was like, let's fight the institution, let's fight the institution, let's, bring it back to the people. And then it doesn't look like he's going his way. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, vote for the guy that supports the institution. Like,
Hmm.
I guess I don't. For me, I don't see like his principles were ever actually worth
Well,
anything other than the chance to get in office. To
it's
me.
because they're not Trump, and that's
Well,
the
oh
most
yeah,
important thing,
yeah. No, that's
apparently.
that's probably fair. Yeah.
And my
That's
thing is like, I mean, there are some positive qualities to Trump. I don't think he's ideal.
Oh,
Um,
by who is who
yeah,
is
yeah.
I mean, no, I'm
Well,
not. I'm not one. I mean, I like Trump. I love Trump. I think he's great overall. Do I agree with absolutely everything he says and does? Of course not. I'd be
yeah.
an irrational clown if I did.
I think that he's strong, and that's what a lot of people like about him. It was a
Hmm.
backlash against political correctness, and
Absolutely.
he is the person who will never apologize or back down, and I think
Right.
that's what the country needs.
Right. I agree.
Um, I really liked Tulsi Gabbard, and she was the one who she was anti-war, and she was the only Democrat who didn't vote for impeachment.
Right.
Which, I mean, what a total farce was.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
They couldn't even, they weren't even impeaching on Russiagate. They were impeaching on Ukrainegate, which is
Yeah,
a Joe Biden scandal.
yep, yep, exactly. And Joe
We
has still not really been investigated on
Yep,
that.
yep. We have
Now Rudy Giuliani has pulled up mountains of dirt on it, but
Yeah.
nothing's been done with it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think Trump could be going harder. I think he could be, although there is still an investigation still open on Hillary. So
Right,
John Durham, I think.
right.
Um,
Well, I almost kind of wonder, Snake. Maybe you can give me your opinion on this, because I had kind of been believing that maybe Trump was holding out to do some of his more direct things until maybe his second term and after the second election was over.
yeah,
Like, like going after Hillary, going after Biden, going after, once he has a full blown 4 years to do that much more work, maybe he could really put the screws to some of these people like they actually deserve.
yeah. Hopefully,
Because
yeah.
ever since 2016, I had been saying, well, once Trump gets in office, because I remember that moment in the debate, he was debating Hillary, and she had said something about like, well, you're not president or something. It's like, yeah, well, if I was, you'd be in jail,
Yeah.
type thing.
And the crowd
Like,
just erupts and cheers.
yeah, everyone was like, oh yeah, finally this horrible woman is going to go away if she loses. Like, this is what we were all thinking. That's what I
Yeah,
was thinking. And I'm like, okay, awesome. If Trump wins, he's going to put this chick away. We're finally going to get justice.
yeah,
And then it ended, and he was like, well, live, let live. It was a good fight. Let's get back to work. No, no, I want you to put her away. You said it too many times during your campaign to not do it now. It needs to be done.
yeah. So I think yeah. I would
I
much
mean,
rather him
like,
being doing
do you
something
think
else.
do you
But
think it's feasible that he'll just kind of start putting some more like big screws down once he gets reelected, type thing? What do you think?
I really hope so. And that investigation is still open. So
Right, right.
Bill Barr seems like he might be willing to go for that. So
I hope so.
And my big thing also against the left is like, I do support Trump on some things, but it's like, stop making me defend Trump. I would much rather criticize, but if like all these things like Ukrainegate, we actually have a treaty with Ukraine specifically to investigate crimes of corruption, and so everything he did, even if he explicitly asked them to do it, is completely legal and in fact mandatory under the law. Russiagate is just a cover for Hillary's involvement with Russia, and that's just completely unfounded. They couldn't even impeach him on that.
Mm.
And Mueller, what a scumbag.
Oh my God. What a waste of
So,
time. What a
and all
waste of
that
space,
Obama,
life, and money.
all that Obamagate stuff is just so true. It's
Oh, it
they
is.
all knew,
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
all trying to stop Trump, and the
Yep.
irony is that Hillary probably empowered Trump because in the leaked emails he was their Pied Piper candidate to try and leech voters away from the people they actually wanted to run against, and
Right.
it backfired just beautifully.
Massively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the
Oh, the
thing,
overestimation.
the one classic thing that just really pissed me off is when at the, what was it? I forget even that white supremacist march where the lady got run over, but Trump said there's good people and bad people on both sides,
Right.
and they said, look, he's defending white supremacy. And
Right.
they cut the clip off there when literally the next sentence he's saying, I'm not talking about the white supremacists. I condemn
Right.
them totally.
Right.
So, and it's just this, I'm just so fed up with the media and these games
Amen.
that they play with our minds, and
Yeah.
it's just all screwed.
Yeah, it's so much of the people just choking it down, not looking for alternate sources of information or even fact checking any of it. They
Mm-hmm.
hear the talking heads and go on with their day. And all the talking heads are all aligned very clearly with one very consistent political spectrum, and it's nowhere near conservatism at all.
And it's hard.
It's
It's hard to
Yeah, go ahead.
even blame most people because who really has the time to go into everything in depth?
Oh,
It's
yeah,
hard to keep up, and
yeah,
it's sometimes even unhealthy because I know I spend a lot of time going into and obsessing over this stuff.
no, absolutely.
So I really blame the media for dropping the ball,
Big
but
time.
they're owned by the politicians. So
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
and the
I
deep state.
love. Oh, the deep state for sure. Yeah, no, they protect the deep state.
Yep.
Certainly, they protect the Bidens. They protected Hillary.
They go
They
back and
protected.
forth.
Oh yeah,
The
they
director of the
protected.
CIA is now a CNN media analyst.
Oh yeah,
Or
yeah. Isn't that amazing?
yeah,
Isn't that amazing?
yep.
Well, and I lost a good amount of respect for Jason Chaffetz when he kind of just stopped being a representative to go and be a news anchor. I'm like, what the hell is this? I was listening to Jason Chaffetz in meetings, and oversight meetings with Trey Gowdy, and they were like the two guys. They were like, the two superheroes of trying to expose all this corruption. And I was getting so frustrated. I'm still frustrated because I feel like Congress did all these exploratory sessions. They called in Hillary, they called in Loretta Lynch, they called in, everyone under the sun, Peter Strzok, all these people to expose all of this horrible, disgusting, foul corruption all across the board. No one's been arrested. No one's been imprisoned. No one's been tried, but the president has been impeached. Make this make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and the guys they have actually arrested and imprisoned surrounding Trump is all stuff that has nothing to do with Russia or the election.
Unreal.
It's all just a show. And I find myself just in awe that now Fox News is the more legitimate, more objective news source.
Right?
Because early 2000s they weren't.
Oh, I hated Fox.
Yeah.
I hated Fox for a majority of my life. I always thought they were, very, very opportunistic and kind of scummy. But now they're the only ones putting people on air that will say things even remotely objectively. It's just
Yeah.
like, what has
It's-
this world turned into, Snake?
the left used to be the ones who were for free speech and free expression and free
Yeah.
sexuality, and
Yeah.
now they're the Puritans.
Yeah.
And they're the ones trying to ban music and video games and offensive language. Like, remember when
Yeah.
it was the right doing that?
Oh, yeah.
And now it's the left. And
Yeah.
now they have what's the word I'm looking for? No leeway for like
Right.
mistakes or deviancy.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, I remember as a kid growing up that it was a big thing about violent video games and all the religious leaders about the violent video games and the conservatives, oh, the violent video
Yeah.
games. You know what? They stopped caring.
Yep.
it only took it only took about 5 or 6 years, a couple generations of video games to realize that it was part of our culture. They just stopped making noise about it.
Well, and they lost the argument legitimately and
Right,
fairly,
they did. Yep.
and
And the
now the
left picked
left,
up, picked
yeah,
it up.
now it's video games are too sexy,
Mm.
which
Oh,
that's
Anita Sarkeesian and
hmm
her nonsense, of course. Yes, yes. The tropes.
it's
We can't have
bizarre.
tropes in video games anymore.
It's bizarre to see the left say things are too sexy. It's like
Right?
that's what the stiffs were saying back when it was
Yeah,
the
their
right.
whole isn't their whole thing like sexual libertarian free will? Like what I mean, what do you people have an issue with?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's supposed to be something you're happy with. Like, look at all these women in their free express. See, this is the stupid thing. Like you know, they can paint it however they want based upon what they want to be offended by. So they can
Yep.
take a woman in a magazine, you know, flaunting her body, and they can say what a great, powerful expression of her, you know, empowering her stance in this culture to, you know, take control and earn money and be a powerful woman. And then some other women on the same side will say, "Oh, this grotesque objectifying women and turning them into sex objects." It's like they can basically just pick their victimhood at whim. They
Mhm.
can pick their offense at whim, and it doesn't even really have to be consistent or sensical.
And the same thing is fine as long as you point it at the supposed oppressors. Like you can objectify men, and you can be racist against whites
Mm,
because they're not the victims,
mm.
apparently.
So yeah, no, and that is the issue of
But the
failure of any type of consistency, in my opinion.
even if they had a point there, eventually it's going to flip, and then where are you going to be?
Exactly.
Because that's what happened in Germany in World War II. They were the victims. Then they
Exactly.
victimized someone else to try and make up for that.
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree with you more, Snake. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And this is maybe part of the problem too, is the complete and utter lack of critical thinking and probably decent education. Because and I remember this when I was a kid. You maybe heard something similar when you were in grade school, but my history teacher made a big point to tell me, you know, it's important for us to learn about history because those who don't learn about their history are doomed to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard that, you know, basically as a mantra in the back of my head growing up, which made me start to really look for sociological and cultural components of history and themes that tend to repeat and you know continue all throughout history. Now, and I'll give you a quick example of kind of how I came to terms with some of this is I look at the Jews, the ancient Jews, who created a moral system that prioritized sanctity of life and the integrity of the nuclear family. And with those two kind of primary moral focuses and all the laws that were kind of structured around it to kind of fixate on focusing these two really strong progressive moral principles that were good for overall society, they managed to survive outside of any of their ancient contemporaries, you know, even up to modern day. Even more so than nations that were far greater than them, including, you know, Babylon and Rome and the European war infrastructure under Germany. You know, they managed to survive through all of us, all of that. And that's a pretty compelling idea of the importance of finding those objective truths that are good for society and civility. Even if an atheist can make the argument, which I think many of them do, of conclusionary morality. Do you know what I mean when I say that? Like the ends are always justified by the means as long as the ends is good, it's basically all right type thing.
Like consequentialist kind of.
Consequentialist, yeah, basically type of morality. Yeah, that's a good way to go to it. Like, so if you look at it that way, what you would probably want to do, if that was your cultural norm or your moral norm, to look at what would make the best policies for a survivable society, you would look at which society had the highest survivability and try to structure something off of that. And I think that's where you could probably make a secular case that some of the finer points of the objective system of the early Jews might be worth considering and looking into.
There is some point to that. Just just merely winning and being more powerful isn't quite uh, the end all be all, but
Right,
there is some point like the SJWs are not conducive to success. So eventually they will
right,
die out
right.
and something else will be left standing, but in the meantime they're going to cause some chaos.
No, I agree.
And
I
it's
100%.
there's like and you were saying learn your history and they think they know history and it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect where it's like they
Right,
have this very low resolution version of history which ironically is just restricted just to like white European history. It's like go
right.
learn about some other countries and cultures beyond just white colonialism. And it leads people to say things like, "Oh, what China's never colonized anything else. They've never been a tyrannical imperial power like England was." Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't hear the secularists pointing to China as a great bastion of secular good anymore.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that argument in a few months now.
But the left is defending them because we can't offend a different race,
Of
so that's
course,
xenophobic to
of
even say
course.
anything bad about a government um, that is made up of a different racial group. And
Exactly.
like I know a bunch of corporations like the NBA are bought out by China too, so
Hmm.
they're kowtowing. It's a
There's a
mess.
lot. It is a mess. It is a complete and utter mess, and we need to, for God's sakes, we need to be able to talk about it. The left doesn't even want us to talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it needs to be talked about. Like this is a threat to our very well-being and our good. Like, I kind of I had that thought of, like, remember when the left kind of freaked out because Trump had assassinated that freaking guy at the airport. What was, I forget his name,
Oh yeah.
Husseini or whatever it was. Basically just bombed him and took care of him. And the left was like, oh no,
Hmm.
Trump has put us in war. We're now going to go to war. We're now going to be attacked by ISIS and so on and so forth. And the caliphates are going to go nuts. Now, I knew the caliphates weren't going to do anything. I knew this because the idea of a caliphate poking the United States and saying, go ahead and come and take us out, when you're willing to take out one of our leaders, I didn't picture they were going to do anything. Second of all, there's no way the left was ever going to be able to know what type of horrors Trump prevented by taking him out. You know what I mean? Because you can always, like, you can tell that the school shooter, oh, that was awful, it was horrible, it was a tragedy, because you heard about it and it was a successful school shooting. You wouldn't generally hear about the school shooting where the shooter was shot right outside before he got in the front door.
Yeah.
you know
Well,
so I mean, we kind of judge everything by like this kind of sense of anticipation that may not even be accurate. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah, I think as far as people it's justified to go after with the military, he was one of them.
Mm,
Um, and it's so ironic that they can sit there and say, "Oh, Trump is putting us in danger by pulling out right now," but
mm.
he's also bad for taking out generals that we're at war with. I think that these wars should have been ended a long time ago, partially because there might be some conflict with China soon, unfortunately, which
Mm.
is going to be if we can't even do anything about Al Qaeda. Well, how are we going to win against the Chinese? Although
Exactly.
there's a bunch of stuff about our government, especially under Obama. We've been funding the terrorists to go after, in Syria, the same people we're fighting in Iraq. We fund them in Syria so that we can destabilize the Syrians. So
Mm, mm,
yeah, it's
absolutely.
all. I've just lost faith in the whole process.
Well, and rightfully so. I don't think the process has been terribly faithful to us.
Yep.
And this is the thing. At the George Floyd, with the George Floyd thing that happened, of course, aside from my initial angst of kind of horror of the event itself, I had this kind of thought like, okay, at least there might be a silver lining in this. At least now we're finally going to talk about the thing that I've been screaming about for years, about some real practical, legitimate police reform. This is what I was preparing that us as a rational society were now going to start to really proactively talk about. Like, how do we kind of erase the thin blue line? How do we
Mm-hmm.
bring some greater accountability and transparency and training, back to the police force? But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. It went the opposite direction. Instead of talking about practical solutions to police reform, we just start talking about how all police are evil, all police are racist, all police are wrong, and they all need to be gotten rid of, and that'll somehow fix it.
Yep.
Like, we we had a chance. We had a chance to discuss something very important, very intrinsic, very necessary for our society. We were all about to engage in a very important conversation about progression in our country, and it was hijacked and railroaded and set on fire
Mm-hmm.
by the crazy extreme leftists.
Yeah. I think the corporations support it because it takes the heat off of them, and the Democrats support it because they think it'll bring them power, and because I think it helps divide people and distract people from the real issues, and so the real issues never get solved.
Mm,
And
right,
all this COVID stuff. So defunding the police, hey, that's free money. Plus, we get to look good because we're racially sensitive.
right,
But
right. I mean, even outside the realm of, like, I almost would have respected, like, I could have respected a lot of positions the left could have decided to take over this, aside from what they chose to take.
yeah,
Like even if it had been something like, we need a peaceful neighborhood militia, you know, we need the cops to work with a citizen outreach component to help, make things de-escalated and better, kind of like what you touched on earlier.
yeah. I mean,
Like, that's
it's
I mean, that's
a
something practical and reasonable to be able to get behind, right?
yeah, and it's revealing kind of a, a lot of the point behind the Second Amendment is like a lot of these leftists are like, oh, okay, well, without the police, we're gonna have to protect ourselves.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. No, exactly. And I mean, if they had probably tried to approach this from almost any other angle other than what they did, like, I probably could have found some way to work with it or even kind of support it. But it's moved outside of the realm of anything practical or rational at all. It's just, we want this. Yeah, we don't know why or if it's actually good, but we just want it. And you just have to do it. And if you don't do it, you're racist. Like, this isn't even a conversation anymore. This is some sort of, I don't know, aggressive tactics to kind of force you into their way of thinking. And it's gross. It's gross to me. Like, you have to think this way. If you don't think this way, you're evil or something's wrong with you. Didn't we kind of progress beyond that in the Dark Ages?
yeah. Well, it's the new Puritanism, and
Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you. That's a good way to put it. That's a really
I
good way to put it.
I think that they have the momentum, and the entire country's talking about this stuff right now. So
Right.
I think at this point, a lot of the protests are just giving cover to the rioters.
Right.
It's not actually helping anything.
Right.
To say nothing of the implications for the spreading of COVID, and or
Mm.
as I tried to keep Wuhan virus alive for a long time, but
I love that.
but yeah, I mean, you've probably heard of the stuff where they aren't tracking the spread in these protests, and they're saying that
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
they're
Yeah.
making special exception for these protests, but not other protests.
Yep.
So I mean, yeah,
Yeah, no,
but
yeah, exactly true. That blows my mind too.
yeah,
It's like, we have a pandemic. Everyone's talking about how the pandemic is. And by the way, people that are making the most noise about the threats of the pandemic is everyone on the left. Okay, everyone on the right is kind of like, can we at least try to start getting back to work and like living our lives? And
yeah.
everyone on the left is just like still like full blown massive panic.
Well, I think there's ways to go back to work and be aware
Right.
of the disease.
I
But at
agree.
some point, would you rather have no job or have COVID? Or
Right. Right.
at some point the treatment is worse
Thank you.
than the
Perfect
disease.
point. Perfect point.
Um,
Yep. Exactly.
and but ironically, at first the right was the ones who were afraid of it and called
Right.
conspiracy theorists and stuff. And now
Right.
if you even question anything about COVID, it's like you're a right wing racist.
Yeah, yeah, you're a nut job.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
So
yeah,
they've
it's
flipped completely just based on what's politically convenient at the time.
exactly, exactly, and they will. I notice the left will definitely weaponize anything they think they can get their hands on,
Yeah.
and I was that was kind of my more heartbreaking moment about all of this stuff that's recently developed is that we've just lost a great opportunity to probably reform something really essential in our country because now it's just a bunch of noise and political weaponization and I mean I can't use any of this. I can't use anything that the left is giving me. It's all just useless garbage noise and like
Yeah. It's a
I would
real
plead with them, pitch something that's practical, pitch something that we can use and maybe get on board with, or at least compromise with. You people are just out of your minds.
Yeah, I'm mad because they're blowing a real opportunity.
They are. That's
Yeah.
my opinion too.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be able to use this as a catalyst for reform and change, like good reform, good change, not whatever the hell this is.
Yeah. Well,
Blows my mind.
yeah.
Well, my
I
goodness,
think
we've nearly made it the 3 hour mark, Snake. My
yeah, I think
goodness, we must love talking to each other.
we found a lot of common ground here tonight. I think
We did.
my bladder's about to explode, so this is a good.
Oh, well, this is a good time then.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, you know what, Snake? I really appreciate you coming and talking with me. This was a great chat. I
Yeah.
loved this. Were there any other final thoughts? Anything you kind of wanted to leave us with?
I think I touched on most of the stuff, and I think
Beautiful.
these are some good bonding moments, so that we can,
Agreed.
so that not everything is just fighting.
Agreed. Maybe I have a series that I am working on, and one of which maybe have already seen, which is that apologetics is hot garbage,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
already did the first one of those. I'm going to do several of them. Maybe you want to join me as
Yeah.
a co-host on one of those.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We'll work that out. By the way, did you ever debate Darth? Did you ever debate Darth
I
Dawkins?
did. I had one. I'm gonna start maybe trying to track him down, but it might not work. He
Ooh.
might remember me because it was a complete rage quit. He
You know what? I think we need to find that and may have that be one of our reviews.
Yeah.
Maybe you could join us to do a debate review of what you went
Yeah.
through with Darth. I think
That
that would
was-
be a fun time.
that was my single biggest bump in subscribers. I got like
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
outstanding. Well, maybe that'll be an extra little good bonding moment for us and we can dissect the dumpster fire that is Darth's methodology.
for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right,
right.
sir. Well, thank you so much, Snake. It truly was a pleasure. I look forward to doing it again with you sometime, and I hope you have yourself a great night, sir.
And back at you.